Chapter 1225. Otherworldly Space. A flame burst out from a corner of the space, and Grimm's sturdy body appeared. As soon as his soul aura appeared, a huge fireball hurriedly pounced towards Grimm. This fireball had a diameter of 5 meters, and it was filled with liquid flame energy that was so condensed that it was almost solid. The high temperature that was overflowing from the edge of the sphere had shaken this space, causing the milky white space barrier around it to creak under the pressure. The temperature at the edge of the fireball had already reached several thousand degrees, while the temperature at its core was over 10,000 degrees. Magi below grade 3 would be roasted into dried meat if they were to get too close to the fireball, let alone being hit by it. However, Grimm did not panic in the slightest when he saw such a terrifying fireball hurtling towards him. Instead, he revealed a smile. "Stop messing around. Let me see your true form." Grimm chuckled as he extended his hand into the fireball and pulled out a strange orb that was still burning quietly. With a slight shake of his hand, the fireball that had lost its core suddenly exploded into a terrifying sea of flames. The entire space around him immediately burst into flames. Grimm, on the other hand, did not seem to feel anything as he stood quietly in the sea of flames, calmly fiddling with the orb in his hand. 80 years. He had wasted 80 years. During these long years, Grimm had struggled with the fire god's orb almost every day. The divine power imprint that the powerful fire god had left in the fire god's orb had completely fused with the origin of fire. It was practically impossible to destroy the divine power imprint. Hence, the only thing Grimm could do was find a way to seal off the divine power imprint's control over the fire god's orb. Normally, this would have been extremely difficult to accomplish. However, Grimm had Alice, a tier 4 witch of fate, to guide him. Under the suppression of Alice's hourglass of time and the prophecy scepter, Grimm was finally able to project a fire doppelganger into the fire god's orb, temporarily replacing the divine power imprint. With this, although the fire god's orb's power was weakened and some of its abilities could not be displayed, it could still be controlled. At the very least, he could now control it. At this moment, Grimm finally gained initial control over the divine fire bead. From today onwards, this divine fire bead truly belonged to him. Grimm fiddled with the divine fire bead and quietly sensed the boundless flame energy within it. He could sense the presence of his soul in every wisp of flame energy. In this way, as long as Grimm willed it, the flame energy that was densely packed in the space could move according to his will and condense into the shape he wanted at any time. Grimm held the divine fire bead tightly. His eyes flickered, and the sea of fire in the space gathered and scattered. It turned into several sparkling fireballs that chased each other in the air, then into scarlet firebirds that filled the sky, and then into a terrifying beast that roared at the sky. Grimm toyed with everything in front of him. As the shape of the flames changed, Grimm's understanding of the energy of flames deepened. In the past, although Grimm could also control fire energy and had comprehended 4 types of fire laws, the traces left behind by knives and axes were too obvious. Now, the flames were him, and he was the flames. The two were inseparable, and there were already signs of them fusing deeply. In Grimm's mind, the AI chip projected the latest results of his physical examination. Grimm, male, rank 4 magus of laws, fire specialization, chaotic physique, extraordinary magic resistance, astral beast bloodline, 13%, heart of laws, law of fire, 56%, stats, strength 27, vitality, 31 agility, 19 spirit, 44 bloodline innate ability, energy black hole, law of fire, increase range, empower flame, flame penetration, flame invisibility, flame critical strike. It had to be said that at Grimm's level, increasing his strength by even a little bit required a huge investment of resources and time. 80 years of tempering his spirit day after day had only increased Grimm's spiritual force by 4 points. Part of it was due to the effects of the mutated mushrooms. Now, the mutated mushrooms were completely useless to Grimm. If he wanted to take a shortcut, he would have to think of ways to find new high-grade resources. All these years of fighting with the Vulcan orb and the Holy Book of Wisdom had given Grimm quite a bit of benefits. Grimm's control of the Heart of Laws had increased from 48% to 56%, and this had given him a new law of fire, Flame Critical Strike. Under the effects of the law of fire, Grimm could give active offensive spells double the damage of the flames, but the cost of double the amount of wizard power. Originally, Grimm's attack power was already very terrifying. Now, with the addition of the critical hit law, the power of Grimm's flames had undergone an earth-shattering transformation. However, with Grimm's current 44 points of spiritual force, using the law of force critical strike would cause his spiritual force to be depleted abnormally quickly. Fortunately, the appearance of the Vulcan orb had alleviated Grimm's spiritual force. Item name: Vulcan orb. Item type: Elemental orb, divine weapon. Item attribute: Fire. Item level: Rank 5. Item base attribute: +3 spiritual force, +2 vitality. Item amplification: Passive fire spells. Summoning fire spells +300% special effect: Flame breath, Flame self-healing, Flame rampage, Flame immunity. Intermediate skill: Scorched earth. Rank 5 divine fire spell. Sealed: Flame armor, defense 1,700 points. Flame space: comes with a small flame space that can store 3 flame creatures. As the Vulcan orb gradually came under Grimm's control, its basic attributes were revealed bit by bit. Compared to a rank 4 wizard weapon, the rank 5 Vulcan orb was naturally much more powerful. Just the series of special effects made Grimm's eyebrows twitch in joy. As long as he was in the flames, Grimm would have the abilities of Flame breath, absorbs fire energy to replenish his body. Flame self-healing, absorbs fire energy to replenish his body's damage. Flame rampage, increases movement speed in flames by 300%, as well as the intermediate flame immunity. With these effects, Grimm's fire abilities were no weaker than those of the Fire Lords. Furthermore, the Vulcan orb also came with a small flame space that could store 3 flame creatures. This meant that Grimm could nurture 3 powerful flame creatures as his henchmen. He could store them in the Vulcan orb and use them as his trump cards at crucial moments. The Vulcan orb's amplification effects were even more gratifying. 300%. Although it was only limited to passive and summoning spells, it was still a significant improvement to Grimm's battle prowess. The most obvious change was Grimm's Burning Domain, which was gradually becoming useless. Its attack power had increased from 200 points to 700 points. This kind of power was enough to pose a threat to ordinary rank 4 wizards. Grimm's favorite Flame Gate had also increased the number of flame creatures he could summon from 500 to 1,500. In a way, Grimm was even more terrifying than those wizards who specialized in summoning spells. However, the only regret was that the rank 5 divine spell that came with the Vulcan orb had been destroyed due to the divine imprint. This meant that Grimm had lost the opportunity to master a rank 5 flame spell. This was undoubtedly a huge regret. After admiring the Vulcan orb, Grimm took out the flaming coral staff from the Elder's Ring. When he gently put the divine fire bead on the tip of the flaming coral magic staff, the 4 flaming corals that were wrapped in the flaming coral magic staff fell off, revealing a small groove. Grimm pressed the Vulcan orb upwards, and the 4 tentacles intertwined once more, firmly locking the Vulcan orb in place. Grimm picked up the fire crystal and weighed it in his hand before putting it away regretfully. Seriously speaking, this fire crystal was a good item to amplify flame spells. Unfortunately, compared to the Tier 5 Fire God's bead, it was worthless. After dealing with the Vulcan orb, Grimm turned around and left the alternate dimension, arriving at the Book of Wisdom. There a small altar was silently revolving. The Book of Wisdom and another strange book were stacked on top of each other, and a portion of the illusory energy from both had already fused together. Since the Vulcan orb was compatible with Grimm's element, he could use the power of the divine weapon of fate to forcefully suppress it. However, This book of wisdom was a divine weapon created by the god of wisdom himself, and it was almost impossible for Grimm to suppress the divine imprint within. Since he could not erase the divine imprint left behind by the god of wisdom, Jiro, he would destroy it completely. Grimm was decisive. He immediately summoned Remy, the plague spirit, and restored it to its original form, which was the secret voodoo poison scroll. However, it still retained its intelligence. Just like that, with the terrifying power of the bloody altar and Grimm's assistance, the secret voodoo poison scroll finally began to devour the book of wisdom bit by bit. The devouring process was extremely difficult, and there were a few times when it almost caused a terrifying backlash. Fortunately, the book of wisdom was just a dead object. Without Jiro's control, it could only rely on the instincts of a rank 5 divine weapon to resist the corrosion of the bloody altar. Coupled with the existence of Remy as an artifact spirit, the subsequent process was basically smooth. Sensing Grimm's arrival, Remy's weak soul image appeared above the two books. "How is it? How far has the fusion gone?" Grimm asked with concern. 87%, Remy replied weakly. "I need resources, I need energy. This bone is really hard to chew. You need to replenish it." 87%. That meant that Remy would need at least another 20 years to completely devour the Book of Wisdom. "Understand. I'll gather the resources and energy you need as soon as possible. Just stay here and finish your work." Chapter 1226. The Crimson Family. It was a resounding and illustrious name. In the Central Continent, the Crimson family had risen from obscurity to its current prominence in the short span of 200 years. 200 years. Perhaps it was a long time for a normal person, but for the high-ranked magi who stood at the peak of the world, it was just a blink of an eye. 200 years might be enough for a rank 1 magus to complete his life. 200 years might only be enough for a high-ranked magus to increase his strength by a little. However, to the Crimson family, 200 years was enough for them to grow from a sprout to the point where they were at the peak of their power. Due to the restrictions of the Northern Witch Council, Alice was unable to publicly announce her relationship with Grimm. Hence, in the eyes of outsiders, the Crimson family only had 2 grade 4 magi. However, this number had been changed recently. An even more terrifying grade 4 magus had appeared in the Crimson family's battle formation. Its appearance had attracted the attention and vigilance of the high-ranked magi. Rumors and information related to the Crimson family spread like wildfire, and all sorts of rumors began to spread. The former grade 3 Thunder Dragon arms had returned to the Crimson family in a powerful state, becoming the 3rd grade 4 magus in the family. A family gathering 3 grade 4 magi. Such a thing had never happened in the scattered forest of towers. The Crimson family had unquestionably become a super family, one that surpassed all the magus families in the Central Continent. In the past, the high-ranked magi had only suspected whether Grimm had the heart to unify the scattered forest of towers. Now, they were no longer doubting, but rather certain that Grimm would do it. It was just a matter of when he would do it. The rise of the Crimson family had caused the higher-ups in the scattered forest of towers to feel awkward. They had plotted for a long time, but they had not succeeded. Now, a fellow who had unexpectedly become a grade 4 magus had replaced their positions, becoming the center of attention in the scattered forest of towers. This made them feel extremely unwilling, but they could not do anything about it. Other than the 3 grade 4 magi from the Crimson family, there were 14 other grade 4 magi in the scattered forest of towers. If they could work together, they would definitely be able to suppress Grimm's rise. Unfortunately, everyone had their own selfish motives. They all had their own schemes and calculations. If he wanted them to contribute their family strength, then he would obediently become someone else's fighter to charge and break through enemy lines. This kind of thinking was good, but it would never become a reality. This could be seen from the relationship between President Fred and Vice President Merva. The two of them had been partners for 400 to 500 years, and their relationship was extremely close. However, there were still no signs of their families merging together. The main reason for this was that the central continent hadn't seen any powerful magi for thousands of years. Without a powerful core figure, the central continent would forever be in a state of disunity, never able to unite. After a period of consolidation and expansion, the Crimson family's foundation was getting deeper and deeper. Apart from a few leaders, the Tier 3 sorcerers that would act as the main force of the family's war against outsiders had also taken shape. Their numbers and quality were equally astounding. Rank 3, Bloodbreed Faction, Blood Knight Soros. Intermediate, Rank 3, Bloodfiend Isa, Beginner, Rank 3, Shapeshifter Spara, Beginner, Rank 3, Rather Advanced, Rank 3, Desirees. Intermediate, Rank 3, Beckett, Intermediate, Rank 3, Moises, Intermediate, Rank 3, Human Sorcerers, Red Dragon Witch Meryl, Beginner, Rank 3, Bug Lich Bliss, Intermediate, Rank 3, Demonis Amelia, Beginner, Rank 3, Dragon Eater Olivia, Intermediate, Rank 3, Alien Brain Faction, Alien Brain Gazruvi, Pinnacle, Rank 3, Split Brain Moke, Beginner, Rank 3, Goblin Faction, Goblin Magician Locke, Beginner, Rank 3, Goblin Great Sage Cabby, Beginner, Rank 3. As for the Tier 2 team, it was even bigger, and their numbers were shocking. During this period, the Crimson family had also obtained a large amount of Kalos alloy through the continuous trade with Molten City. This way, the magical furnace would no longer be a hindrance to the appearance of the Magic Machine Army. Once upon a time, there had been an undercurrent secretly contacting Molten City, trying to use pressure to cut off the trade between the Crimson family and Molten City. When the Lord of Molten City, Alfred, was tempted, Grimm took out the mutated mushrooms from the spirit world at the right time. Faced with this top-grade resource that could benefit even high-grade sorcerers, Alfred yielded once more. Using 3 types of mutated mushrooms to exchange for Kalos alloy, the cooperation between the two parties could continue. When news of the Crimson family possessing 3 types of otherworld resources that could raise the basic attributes of high-grade sorcerers leaked out from Molten City, it instantly caused a commotion in the scattered forest of towers. No matter how embarrassed they were, even if they did not want to continue strengthening the Crimson family, due to the urgent desire to increase their strength, all the high-grade sorcerers in the scattered forest of towers could not help but send representatives to purchase these top-grade resources from the Crimson family. The value of resources that could raise the basic strength of a Tier 4 sorcerer was extremely difficult to estimate. Hence, many Tier 4 sorcerers whose strength had stagnated for too long could only open their treasure vaults and take out their treasures, wanting to trade with the Crimson family. After a round of ruckus, the Crimson family relied on selling the giant shiitake mushrooms and other resources to buy another 100 high-grade Sith origin substance, as well as 2 void stones, 17 bloodline purification medicines, and 6 high-grade bloodline reconstruction medicines. Most of the items that could be traded between Tier 4 sorcerers were high-grade resources and materials. As for the powerful tools, they did not even have enough for themselves, so how could they trade them away? As for being able to obtain 100 Sith Source Substance, even Grimm was extremely surprised. Source Substance was the future of a Tier 4 sorcerer. If a Tier 4 sorcerer wanted to cross the threshold, apart from relying on their innate talent and potential, Source Substance was also an indispensable resource. There were actually people willing to use Source Substance to exchange for the mutated mushrooms, using their future to increase their strength. Even Grimm could not judge whether this was the right thing to do. After all, he had never experienced hundreds of years of stagnant strength, so he could not understand the pain and despair of those involved. Not everyone could reach the limit of their strength before the end of their lifespan, and then use the source substance to become a respected great sorcerer. Therefore, giving up the pointless struggle early on and living in the present was not necessarily a bad attitude. After more than 100 years, Grimm once again returned to the fire elemental plane. Compared to the suppression he felt in the other world, Grimm did not feel the slightest discomfort in the fire elemental plane. In fact, from top to bottom, from body to soul, He felt relaxed and at ease. As soon as he stepped out of the teleportation gate, the flames in the fire elemental plane automatically gathered around Grimm, forming a strange halo that looked like a flaming halo. Around the ring of flames, a few pure fire spirits that were born in this world appeared out of nowhere and danced around Grimm. These fire spirits followed Grimm wherever he went. It was as if he had become the ruler of this fire elemental world, causing the entire world to tremble and breathe according to his aura. However, Grimm knew that he was only a medium. What truly attracted the fire spirits was the divine fire orb embedded at the top of the flaming coral staff. In order to prevent others from discovering the divine fire orb, Grimm could only forcefully cut off the resonance between the divine fire orb and the fire elemental world. Only then did he disperse the strange fire spirits that lingered around him. Grimm closed his eyes and silently communicated with the world, quickly obtaining information about his location from the flames. The fire elemental plane was too large. Without a specific waymark, Grimm would not be able to travel across it even if he tried his entire life. Back when Grimm was only a Tier 2 sorcerer, the fire elemental plane was filled with perils and dangers. But now that he had become a Grade 4 fire sorcerer, everything became much easier. Traversing the fire elemental plane did not feel like an adventure, but a relaxing and pleasant trip instead. Perhaps it was because of the pure fire energy in Grimm's body, but most of the fire elemental creatures treated him as a native here. Hence, along the way, all the wild monsters that he met were busy walking on their own. They were no longer like before, pouncing on Grimm the moment they saw him. Grimm was still dressed as a sorcerer. He wore a red sorcerer's robe and a black cloak on the outside. He wore a hood and held a staff in his hand, looking like a leisurely traveler as he traversed the fire elemental continent. When he was busy, he would teleport 6 or 7 times in a row, traversing more than 200 kilometers each time. When he was free, he would intrude into the nests of the intelligent fire elemental races to visit the strong ones. When he was bored, he would stop at a strange place and build a magic hut. He would sleep in it without doing anything. It had to be said that the world will of the fire elemental plane was different from the rest. It did not have the pressure of the sorcerer world, only an indescribable sense of laziness and leisure. It could be said that the lords, and great lords of the 4 elemental planes were too lazy. With the size and power of the 4 elemental planes, if they were a little more diligent, they could gather a terrifying elemental flood and defeat most of the known advanced civilizations. Chapter 12:27. The power of the fire elemental plane could only be understood by those who had personally experienced it. The fire elemental plane was huge and vast. Its surface area was more than 10 times the size of the sorcerer world, and it was still expanding. The fire elemental plane was not as peaceful as it seemed on the surface. Although it would not invade one secondary plane after another like the sorcerer world, in the hundreds of thousands of years since the birth of the fire elemental plane, it had intentionally or unintentionally invaded several famous civilizations in the universe. Although the versions of the story were different, the development of the plot was shockingly similar. It was always a tyrannical race that appeared out of nowhere, invading and occupying one weak civilization after another. When the civilization's strength reached a certain level, it would involuntarily set its sights on the fire elemental plane, which had endless sources of soldiers and fire energy. Their past successes and victories had caused the powerful species to lose their rationality. They had delusions of conquering and enslaving the elemental planes, treating them as resource planes that they could plunder as they pleased, and using them as a springboard to invade other worlds. They had undoubtedly overestimated their own strength and underestimated the foundation of the elemental plane. When they opened a plane gate that led directly to the elemental realm in their source world and wanted to invade the elemental plane, terrifying elemental creatures poured into this new world under the command of the elemental lords, and elemental lords. Those crazy people's dream of dominating the elemental plane did not come true. Instead, their source world became a land where billions of elemental creatures wreaked havoc. The direct connection between the two worlds also caused a conflict between the laws of the plane. No matter how well the new plane developed, how could it be compared to the ancient elemental plane? Therefore, under the assimilation of the laws and the invasion of a large number of elements, the internal environment of the new plane also underwent earth-shattering changes. Gradually, the new plane was assimilated by the elemental plane, and under the guidance of the strange laws, it deeply integrated with the elemental plane. Thus, the new plane disappeared, and the elemental plane developed a lot. In the long history of the plane's development, there were countless tyrannical creatures and powerful races that wanted to challenge and conquer the elemental plane. However, without exception, they all became stepping stones for the expansion of the elemental plane. Thus, Grimm's horizons were broadened when he walked in the fire elemental plane. He saw countless fire creatures and a large number of semi-elemental creatures. Most of these half-elemental creatures were native creatures of failed planes that had been assimilated into new races. These creatures were obviously not recorded in the Wizard's Handbook, so they were worth collecting and researching. The Valley of Fire and Dust, the strange scenery, the perilous and turbulent Sea of Ashes, the sacred holy flame altar worshipped by countless fiery creatures, the huge volcanoes that were constantly spewing thick smoke and dust, and the sky was covered by black clouds. The environment of the fire elemental plane was too harsh and cruel. Ordinary creatures of the plane couldn't survive here at all. However, this did not mean that there were very few creatures in the fire elemental plane. On the contrary, to a certain extent, the number of creatures in the fire elemental plane far exceeded that of ordinary material planes. After all, most of the biological races in the material plane, especially those with intelligence, could not compare to elemental creatures in terms of reproduction and living speed. While traversing the fire elemental plane, Grimm had more than once seen a strange fire elemental gathering point suddenly flash with red light. Then, the most common primary fire spirit of the fire elemental plane would be born. Grimm had also tried to analyze and research the origin of the birth of fire elemental creatures, but he was isolated by the violent will of the world, unable to pry into the deeper secrets of the fire elemental plane. After all, he was not a native of this plane. His soul and consciousness had always resisted the impulsive and violent invasion of the fire elemental plane's will. Being a magus was a profession that focused on intelligence. One could not easily give their body and mind to the instinctive changes of emotions that could be easily controlled by others. It was precisely because of this profession that Grimm had always been incompatible with this plane, unless he opened up his soul and was willing to accept the invasion of the plane's will. Otherwise, he would always be an outsider in the fire elemental plane and would not be able to integrate completely. But now that he had the Vulcan bead, he had a stable and solid mental connection with the consciousness of the plane that was hazy, illusory, yet real. Every day in the fire elemental plane, he was able to obtain a vague understanding of fire from every object and every life he came into contact with. This, in turn, increased Grimm's control over the law of fire. After all, the fire elemental plane was the origin of all fire elemental creatures, as well as those that practiced the law of fire. Only here would they be able to obtain the things they truly wanted. Grimm traversed the fire elemental plane as he pleased. Every breath he took was filled with the pure and clean air of the fire elemental plane. This kind of air might burn a normal human's lungs and trachea into charcoal in an instant, but to Grimm, it was warm and comfortable. Taking a deep breath, he felt as if his entire chest was soaring, as if he was drinking fine wine. There was no one around, no chores, no need to worry about being hunted down by enemies, and no need to care about the changes in the world. He was alone in this land of origin, unrestrained, and he could do whatever he wanted. This strange feeling of being able to do as he pleased was something that no other environment could give him. Grimm stopped at a relatively flat cliff at the edge of the Sky-Rend Canyon and began preparing a sumptuous dinner for himself. In the fire elemental plane, the sky was always dark red, and there was no distinction between day and night. Therefore, even Grimm could not tell if this meal was breakfast, lunch, or dinner. As a grade 4 fire wizard, his entire body and mind could be instantly elemental, and this reduced the physiological and survival needs of a flesh and blood body to the extreme. His life would not be threatened even if he did not eat for a month or two, but out of human habits, Grimm would still eat once a week to maintain the happiness of his flesh and blood body. He set up a pot of soup, lit a bonfire, and quickly boiled a pot of mushroom soup. He then tossed in a few appropriately sized fire dragon ribs. The small campsite was immediately filled with a fragrant aroma, and anyone who smelled it would not be able to help their appetite. Just as Grimm was about to gorge himself with a bowl full of food, the steaming fire mist beside him suddenly parted, and a strange fire spirit with an old face and a hunched body walked out from within. It smells so good. It's rare for an esteemed guest to come to the Skyren Canyon. I wonder if I can disturb you for a meal? This strange fire spirit was obviously different from the others. The faces of other fire spirits were blurry, and it was impossible to distinguish their specific characteristics. However, this fire spirit's facial features were clear, and even its behavior was no different from the nobles of the human world. What made Grimm even more alarmed was that the fire energy emanating from its body was also at grade 4. Since we've met, it must be fate. If you don't mind, we can eat together. Grimm replied with a smile. That's great. The old fire spirit immediately beamed with joy. To be honest, I heard from the juniors nearby that there's a traveler from another world wandering around here. I just wanted to sneak over to take a look. However, I didn't expect the food to be so delicious. That's why I've come out to disturb you. While quickly explaining, the old fire spirit sat down by the bonfire and raised his nose to sniff. He could not help but exclaim in admiration, "It really smells good." Only you, foreign travelers, can bring in such a strange delicacy. Taking the bowl and chopsticks, the old fire spirit did not stand on ceremony, and chatted with Grimm as he enjoyed the delicious meal. Fire dragon meat filled with the essence of strange flames, a strange mushroom that could improve the life force of high-grade creatures, and a soup that contained 41 types of strange seasonings. Such a delicious meal would be extremely precious even in the Magus world. Every mouthful would probably cost a fortune. The entire pot was worth more than 200,000 magic crystals, which was enough to buy a small Magus tower. Awesome, awesome. I've never tasted such a delicious soup in my life. The meat is fire dragon meat, and should be grade 3. It's so delicious. But what's in this mushroom soup? Why haven't I tasted it before? Is it a mutant that you've cultivated? The old fire spirit was indeed knowledgeable, being able to discern the contents of the soup just from the taste alone. This mushroom is a mutant that I obtained from the spirit realm. It can improve the basic vitality of high-grade creatures. Grimm did not try to show off or hide anything, and explained simply with a calm expression. No wonder I feel so comfortable after drinking this soup. It's like I've just soaked in the sea of ashes. I must thank you for your hospitality. The old fire spirit could not help but be speechless. I can't just take advantage of you. Come, take a look at these things. See if there's anything you can use. With that said, the old fire spirit waved his hand and tore open a crack in the void. He took out a few strange items and placed them in front of Grimm. There was a fire essence stone that was the size of a cobblestone, quietly burning with bright yellow flames. There was a fire dragon's egg that was the size of a human head and covered in strange magical patterns. There was a fist-sized crystal that was like a solid flame. There was a fire ant queen, a lava giant core, a flame crystal core. Chapter 1228. The Molten Crystal. Grimm's eyes sparkled. He was pleasantly surprised to find a molten crystal in the pile of treasures the old fire spirit had taken out. It was a rare level 4 fire-type material. If he did not have the divine fire bead, the molten crystal would have been Grimm's first choice to embed on the flaming coral staff. But now, with a better one, Grimm would not turn back. Seeing Grimm playing with the molten crystal with a thoughtful look on his face, the old fire spirit could not help but recommend it. Your Excellency, you have a good eye. I found this molten crystal in the depths of a sea of ashes. It can increase fire damage by 12%, and it also comes with a molten shield with a defense of 900 degrees. It is a good level 4 fire-type material. However, the next moment, the old fire spirit's introduction came to an abrupt end. He stared blankly at the strange staff that Grimm had taken out from his dimensional pocket. The entire staff seemed to be made of a strange dark red coral. The head of the staff had 4 arms of the coral twisting together, and a strange orb burning with golden flames was embedded in the middle. The moment the wizard's staff was taken out, the entire world seemed to have changed color, and the wind and clouds surged. Under the guidance of a strange force, the dark red, low-hanging fiery clouds above the cliff began to slowly rotate with a magic wand as the center. The funnel of the whirlpool kept moving downwards, as if it was going to merge with the divine fire bead. Even the old fire spirit, sitting opposite Grimm, suddenly became serious. He could feel the fire energy in his body becoming restless, as if it wanted to break out of his body and enter the embrace of the divine fire bead. After all, it was a level 5 divine artifact. Even though Grimm had tried his best to conceal it, its elegance and extraordinariness were still as dazzling as ever. Grimm tapped the staff in his hand, and a majestic wave of fire swept out, instantly dispersing the strange phenomenon. The surging clouds in the sky roared angrily, and the terrifying sound waves reached hundreds of miles away, causing the whole world to tremble. After Grimm put away his staff, the strange phenomenon slowly faded away. However, the terrifying roar that contained the will of the world was deeply imprinted in the old fire spirit's soul. The old fire spirit let out a long sigh. I didn't expect you to have such a treasure on you. Looks like I've embarrassed myself today. I can't just accept your hospitality for nothing. I'll take this molten fire crystal as payment for my meal. My name is Sean, and I live in the Raging Fire domain not far away. If you're interested, you're welcome to be my guest there. If there's a chance, I'll definitely pay a visit. I have to hurry on with my journey, so I won't be staying here any longer. Grimm refused politely. The old fire spirit Cheyenne nodded silently. He put away the other treasures and tossed the molten crystal to Grimm. Then, he turned around and turned into a cloud of scattered flames, vanishing on the spot. Grimm held the molten fire crystal in his hand, feeling the pure and surging flame energy inside. He couldn't help but nod silently. This thing was no longer useful to him, but he could take it back and refine it into a Tier 4 magic puppet. Although Grimm had a powerful shadow fiend as his bodyguard and did not care about other magic puppets, it was still a good idea to have a few more magic puppets to throw out some Tier 4 fire spells in battle. The old fire spirit was an experienced Tier 4 flame creature, but it did not notice the shadow fiend hiding behind Grimm. This was the main reason why Grimm dared to venture into the fire elemental plane alone. If those ignorant fellows dared to cause trouble for him, Grimm would definitely make them regret their choices. He had already healed his soul, obtained the divine fire pearl, and secretly brought the shadow fiend with him. It was because of this that Grimm dared to show off his treasures in front of the old fire spirit. If the other party was greedy and dared to make a move, Grimm could take the opportunity to collect a high-quality fire crystal core. The fire elemental plane was more than 10 times larger than the Magus world, and there were countless fire creatures living there. High-level creatures that were rarely seen in material planes could be seen everywhere. Everywhere he went, there were countless Tier 2 and Tier 3 fire creatures wandering around aimlessly. If Grimm had the heart to hunt here, he would definitely return with a bountiful harvest. Moreover, in other planes, such high-level creatures would not wander around alone. They were usually the leaders of small to medium-sized forces. Trying to deal with such a fellow would undoubtedly be like poking a hornet's nest. It would be so annoying that it would annoy you to death. However, in the fire elemental plane, there were many fire creatures who had Tier 2 or Tier 3 strength but were still ignorant and did not have the intelligence to match their strength. Even the local intelligent races did not treat these brainless creatures as their own kind. They only treated them as walking fire element materials or resources. When needed, they would gather people to hunt them down. When not needed, they would be allowed to roam freely in their territory like wild monsters. Grimm no longer had any use for these Grade 2 and Grade 3 materials, but his followers still had use for them. The Rank 3 Fire Crystal Core was a great supplement for Meryl, who possessed the Red Dragon bloodline. Hence, every few days, Grimm would make a move on the Tier 3 wild monsters he met along the way, collecting high-quality flame crystal cores one after another. When Grimm had just entered the fire elemental plane, he had tried to contact his old friend, the flaming tiger Sindar. However, from the blurry response from the spell, Sindar was too far away, beyond the range of his fire spell. Even with the help of the AI chip, he could only get a rough direction and was unable to communicate with Sindar. Hence, Grimm could only give up on the idea of visiting his old friend and focus on rushing to a predetermined location. The Sea of Ashes. It had to be said that the Sea of Ashes was a forbidden area in the fire elemental plane where powerful beings gathered. Just like how the material plane separated the continents from the oceans, the Sea of Ashes was a barrier that separated the fire elemental continents. This made it difficult for them to communicate and interact with each other, giving rise to different fire elemental civilizations. Although the Sea of Ashes was also burning with flames, its energy level was much higher than that of ordinary flames. If ordinary fire elemental beings stayed in the Sea of Ashes for a long time, their flame cores would melt and they would lose their independent consciousness. Only high-ranked fire elemental beings could rely on the protection of the law of fire to avoid becoming fuel for the Sea of Ashes. Other fire elemental beings kept a respectful distance, not daring to approach the Sea of Ashes at all. Many fire elemental lords and monarchs would even build their palaces in the Sea of Ashes. This way, they could isolate themselves from the outside world and show their affinity with the Sea of Ashes. The flame sovereign king that Grimm was going to visit was one such strange fellow. Even with Grimm's vitality, he was slightly exhausted from the continuous flame teleportation and the tireless journey. Finally, 3 months after entering the fire elemental plane, Grimm reached the edge of the Sea of Ashes, which was the entrance to the flame sovereign king Grimm's palace. As soon as Grimm set foot on a strange flame altar at the edge of the Sea of Ashes, 5 flame guards surrounded by greenish-white flames appeared and blocked his way. "Halt! Magus from another world, you have trespassed into the territory of the mighty flame sovereign king Grooms. If you refuse to back out, we will take the initiative to attack you. Please leave." These flame guards were only at Grade 3, but they were not afraid of Grimm's spiritual pressure at all. Instead, they threatened him with their words, as if they would start a fight if they did not agree. When the 5 flaming sentinels surrounded Grimm, several hidden spots nearby trembled. Flames surged, and murderous flaming legions emerged one after another, throwing their explosive aura at Grimm from afar. If it had been Grimm at Grade 2 or Grade 3, he would have retreated in panic, his face pale and his lips pale. However, Grimm had advanced to Grade 4, and such a small scene could no longer intimidate him. "Little fellow, don't be so impulsive. I came here because of your sovereign king's invitation. I think it's best if you communicate with your superiors before deciding whether to take action or not." Because of his lordship's invitation, the flame guards looked at each other, unable to make up their minds. However, one of the flame guards had a fiery temper and roared, "Inviting a human magus? That's impossible. His lordship hates you humans. Why would he invite a mere Grade 4 magus? He must be lying. Let's take him down." Under its instigation, the rest of the flame guards also became restless. Some of them could not hold back and wanted to take action. Grimm's face instantly turned gloomy. Grimm's was at most a Grade 5 flame sovereign king. Even though he was a level higher than Grimm, he did not have any authority over him. Grimm was only here because he was interested in Grimm's suggestion. He was not here on a pilgrimage. Therefore, the attitude of the flaming guards had undoubtedly infuriated Grimm. With the protection of a shadow demon and the divine fire orb, Grim was confident that he could escape from the fire elemental plane back to his wizard's pagoda. Therefore, he couldn't hold back his anger. His heart was burning with anger, and the rule heart in his body began to stir restlessly. Stop! Right at this moment, a deep and low explosive shout suddenly resounded. In the direction of the sea of ashes, raging flames raged. The sea of flames parted, and a gigantic molten giant walked out with earth-shattering footsteps. Chapter 1229. Seeing the newcomer, the flame guards present all bowed in greeting. My name is Leolise, and I'm one of the lords under Lord Grom. I'm here to welcome you. Please come with me. The 10-meter-tall, molten giant spoke in a strange, muffled voice to Grim. He turned to the flame guard who had wanted to start a fight and shouted, Drat, you're too rude to a guest. I punish you to do hard labor in the rocky abyss for 10 years. You can only return after gathering 100 high-grade burning stones. Yes. The flame guard lowered his head with a dejected expression and bowed to the molten giant once again. He then turned around and was escorted by a group of hellfire spiders into the distance. The rest of the flaming guards looked terrified and uneasy. They all moved to the side and made way for Grim to move forward. Elemental creatures did not have the formalities of human society. After teaching his subordinates a lesson, the molten giant turned around and stepped into the sea of ashes once more. The moment the molten giant approached, the boiling sea of ashes automatically split into two, revealing a strange path paved with fire crystals. Grim maintained his human form and followed closely behind the molten giant, entering the sea of ashes. This was a strange path that extended endlessly in the sea of ashes. The rolling flames in the sea of ashes silently split apart in front of them, and then silently merged together behind the two of them. It was as if the two were walking in a transparent glass cover. The inside of the cover was calm, while the outside was filled with raging flames. It was a completely different scene. The molten giant did not seem to be good at socializing. He only cared about his own journey, and did not seem to have any intention of conversing with Grim. Although the Sea of Ashes was known as the Sea of Death by most fire elemental creatures, it was impossible for life to exist in it. However, as Grim followed the molten giant for a long journey of nearly 100 miles, he could sense traces of fire life forms not far away from the light barrier through the Vulcan orb and the AI chip scanning. These guys seemed to be very curious about Grim's arrival. One moment, they disappeared into the depths of the sea of fire, and the next moment, they came out and peeped at the light barrier. The molten giant obviously knew about their existence, but it did not explain anything to Grim. Therefore, Grim could only keep his suspicions in mind and secretly calculate. According to the AI chip's analysis, the energy level of an ordinary fire elemental plane had already reached 1 to 200 degrees. This also meant that an outsider in the fire elemental plane would have to endure nearly 200 degrees of fire damage at every moment. In the Magus world, 200 degrees of elemental damage could only be achieved by rank 2 Magi. Therefore, the minimum rank requirement to explore the fire elemental world was rank 2. Moreover, the sorcerers of other lineages could not be replenished by the elemental energy of the outside world at all in the fire elemental plane. Once the wizard power in their bodies was exhausted by the harsh and cruel environment, they would be forced to leave this place. However, in this sea of ashes, the energy level of the plane space had already soared to over 1,000 degrees. Without the protection of the law of fire, even those flame creatures would not be able to survive here. The fact that the molten flame giant could move freely in the sea of ashes meant that it naturally possessed the law of fire. If Grim could kill it and take away the flame core in its body, there was a high chance that he would be able to analyze the law of fire it possessed. This plundering method of obtaining the law of fire was much faster than painstakingly experiencing and comprehending it himself. However, looking at the molten flame giant's 10-meter-tall body, that terrifying stone fist that was as large as a millstone, and the surging flame energy in its body, even if Grim went all out and summoned the Shadow Fiend, In an environment like the Sea of Ashes, his chances of winning were only 73%. Moreover, Grimm would have to pay the price of lightly injuring himself and the Shadow Fiend. If the molten flame giant was more violent and detonated its core in the instant of failure, Grimm would have gained nothing. Apart from being covered in injuries and some bits and pieces of the molten flame giant, he would not have gained anything else. With Grimm's understanding and familiarity with these flame creatures, there was a high chance that they would self-destruct in defeat. Due to the difficulty of dealing with these flame creatures and the difficulty of obtaining spoils of war from them, there were not many Magus families in the Magus world that were willing to develop the fire elemental plane. These flame creatures were too poor and too unyielding. It was not worth it to fight them. The 100-kilometer journey was quickly passed by as Grimm let his imagination run wild. When the huge palace of the flame sovereign king grooms appeared in front of him, even the usually calm Grimm was a little absent-minded. The palace was made of wood and supported by stone pillars. Over 100 stone pillars, so thick that it would take 5 people to wrap their arms around it, supported the majestic palace. To be able to build such a huge palace in the terrifying Sea of Ashes that was filled with raging flames was a miracle in itself. The amount of manpower, resources consumed in the process was enough to leave Grimm speechless just by estimating it. The Flame's sovereign king was indeed worthy of his name. Only such a person could match such a miraculous place. It was blazing red and had a terrifying temperature that even the void was burning. However, it was strangely harmonious, as if the flames were one with the surrounding void. No matter how fiercely it burned, it would not cause any spatial fluctuations. The moment Grimm stepped into the palace, he stared blankly at the fiercely burning humanoid flame, his eyes filled with astonishment and shock. He was no longer a novice who knew nothing. With the power of a rank 4 fire wizard, he could see that the flames in front of him were extraordinary. This was the power of fire that was derived from the laws of the plane and was naturally different from the ordinary flames that burned in the world. The power condensed at its core naturally gave off a majestic and holy aura. Although Grimm boasted that he had grasped some of the laws of fire, he had only mixed a trace of the laws of fire into ordinary fire spells. However, the flame in front of him was so pure and majestic. The flames in its body were condensed from the laws of fire, without a trace of impurities or disorder. All of the laws of fire converged into a gurgling stream that circulated within its body. It was abnormally docile and obedient. However, Grimm, who had personally controlled the laws of fire, knew how wild and violent they were. Even if it was just a drop or a trace of the laws of fire that leaked out, it would cause an immeasurable and terrifying firestorm. On the other hand, the fire giant was like a terrifying statue, allowing the streams of law fire to quietly flow through his body. He didn't feel any discomfort at all, nor did he show any signs of being unable to hold on. Grimm stood there silently, staring at the fire giant for a long time. Although the fire giant did not say anything or express its stance, Grimm had learned a lot from its observation and analysis of its existence. At his level, he no longer had any examples of what he should do in the future. The only thing he could do was to create a path and direction for himself to continue developing according to his own potential and current situation. Now that he had personally seen the true form of a rank 5 flame monarch, Grimm suddenly had a point of reference, as well as a chance to correct his past mistakes. Therefore, the moment Grimm stepped into the blazing flame hall and saw the fire giant, he suddenly froze. His entire being fell into a strange, chaotic, and mysterious feeling. The golden fire giant, sitting high above, suddenly opened its eyes, glancing at the dazed Grimm with a trace of admiration and pity in its eyes. "Your Majesty, what's wrong with this fellow? Should I wake him up?" The molten giant Leolis, who looked even more powerful and majestic than the flame monarch, could not help but hum. "No need." The fire giant scolded in annoyance. "You bunch of fools. You've been following me for so long, yet you haven't learned anything. You guys are all brawn and no brains. Do you think size is the only thing that determines a powerhouse's strength? Don't forget that we are creatures of fire. Only the control and improvement of the power of fire can determine the source of our strength. The molten giant felt dizzy from the scolding and could only scratch his head as he spoke. Your Majesty, why are you suddenly angry? Didn't I already advance by a small rank in the past 300 years? You've been by my side for almost 300 years, and you've only advanced from rank 4 to high rank 4. You still have the cheek to be proud? Look at this human magus. He just saw me, and he's already comprehended something. In my opinion, he'll catch up to you in less than 10 years. When that time comes, I won't be afraid of him. The molten giant Leolis said proudly, even if he's the same rank as me, I'll only need a punch to kill him. The fire giant's expression immediately darkened, and the law of fire that flowed quietly in his body showed signs of going berserk. Bastard, how many times have I told you that what determines our strength isn't our muscles or size, but the level of our law of fire? Without the support of the law of fire, what's the use of having that huge body of yours? The molten giant, who had been scolded once more, wanted to defend himself, but was interrupted by the fire giant who had suddenly discovered something strange. And what's this? It can actually hide in shadow matter. Since you're in my great hall of fire, come out. The fire giant's eyes widened, and he stared at the shadow that had almost shrunk to the size of a fist under Grim. With a flip of his hand, the endless power of fire instantly burned every inch of the hall. Wherever the power of fire exploded, there was no place for shadows to hide. Chapter 1230. Beep. Detected a rank 5 flame creature template. Rank is stable, energy is stable, spiritual model is stable. Comparing data, correcting basic model of host body. Beep. Comparing data completed. Found a total of 31 deviations, 17 types of errors, 164 invalid pointers, and 6 serious errors. Requesting host's instructions. Do you wish to correct the data according to the new rank 5 flame creature template? The moment Grim saw the fire giant, the AI chip seemed to have discovered a new continent. It began to crazily demand Grim's spiritual force, pouring it into the AI chip's highly efficient data operation. Even with Grim's rank 4 spiritual force, it was difficult for him to keep up with such a crazy amount of data. It was as if a black hole had appeared in Grim's mind, devouring his spiritual force at a crazy rate. Fortunately, he was no longer the same as before. He gritted his teeth and withstood the AI chip's frantic demands, gradually stabilizing the AI chip's data operation. I'll first establish a perfect rank 5 creature template, and when I have the time in the future, I'll do the corresponding adjustments. After enduring the first round, Grim finally stopped the AI chip's madness and regained control of his body. However, that round had used up 70% of his spiritual force, causing his mental state to become dispirited and listless. When he diverted a portion of his spiritual force to allow himself to return to normal, he realized that something was wrong with the situation around him. The shadow fiend that was supposed to protect him had now revealed itself, standing in front of him as it struggled to break free from the flaming ropes. As if sensing a glimmer of light in Grim's eyes, the fire giant, sitting high above the hall, finally spoke. You've finally woken up. This little fellow is rather interesting. If you hadn't woken up, I would have captured him to study. The voice was not loud, nor was it resonant. However, in the Great Hall of Flames, it was exceptionally majestic and oppressive. As the voice traveled, it seemed to resonate with the fire elemental essence that was everywhere in the hall, making the voice even more imposing and intimidating. Grim endured the intense headache caused by the rapid depletion of spiritual force in his mind. He calmed his mind and finally bowed towards the strange fire giant. I'm honored to have received your audience, and I'm honored to have received your guidance. Grim hereby expresses his heartfelt gratitude to the great Lord of Groms. Kid, don't be in such a hurry to thank me. We still have some old scores to settle. The giant of fire snorted and looked at Grim with an unfriendly gaze. I wonder what your majesty is referring to? 200 years ago, you barged into the fire elemental plane and killed one of my subordinates, the Flame Lord. How should we settle this debt? 200 years ago, the Lord of the Flames, Grim's mind raced, and he quickly matched it with some of the fragments in his memory. I was reckless and ignorant when I was young. Please forgive me for offending you, your majesty. Grim hurriedly put on a solemn expression, as if he was sincerely apologizing. As a Tier 5 Flame Monarch, the Flame Monarch had used such a roundabout method to summon Foam to the fire elemental plane. Naturally, the Flame Monarch could not have done so simply because of the death of a Tier 2 subordinate 200 years ago. The other party's actions were obviously to pave the way for what would happen next. Of course, Grim was well aware of this, but he could only lower himself and go with the flow. I have plenty of Tier 2 Flame Lords under me, so this isn't a big deal. However, you killed me without telling me, making me the laughingstock of the other Flame Monarchs. It's not up to me to not care about that. The Flame Giant was very relaxed, and no expression could be seen on his face that was condensed from golden flames. Grim is willing to do his best to make up for his mistakes. If there's anything you need, Grim will do his best. The Giant of Fire revealed a faint smile, seemingly satisfied with Grim's tactfulness. I'm looking for something. I originally wanted to borrow Medusa's strength to search for it, but unfortunately, I failed. Now, that item should be in Medusa's hands. So, I want you to help me take it back. Grim was shocked and said in shock, "Snatch the item from Medusa's hands? My lord, that Medusa is a Tier 7 Great Witch." The Giant of Fire laughed maniacally. "I'm not that stupid to ask you to go against a Tier 7 Great Witch directly. That Medusa relies on the protection of fate to spy on the secrets of the powerhouses of various planes, and then uses this method to threaten and lure them into working for her. This kind of behavior is extremely vile, and has long since caused everyone's dissatisfaction. But don't worry. Her main body is hidden in a mysterious space called the Domain of Destiny, and she usually won't step out of it. The ones running around and controlling the situation for her outside are either her Destiny avatars or some powerhouses from other planes under her control. You won't meet her main body. A while ago, she sent a Destiny avatar to see me, wanting to borrow my strength to deal with you. The method she used to blackmail me was that item. That bitch knew that I was looking for that item, but she actually sent someone to snatch it away. So, I don't plan on helping her this time, which is why I called you here." Grim took a deep breath and asked calmly, "What do you want me to do?" "According to the last information I received, that item has already entered the Magus world. That's a place that even I can't easily step into, so you want me to help you get that item back?" "That's right. As long as you can do this, I'll be on your side in the battle between you and that bitch in the future. Hee. Although I, Groms, am not the strongest in the fire elemental plane, I'm still the strongest among the 7 Flame Monarchs. With my support, you can definitely become a flame overlord of this world. When the time comes, I'll give you a territory, and you'll be considered one of the lords of the fire elemental plane. How about it? Isn't this generous enough?" Grim frowned and thought hard for a moment, then said resolutely, "Compared to the territory, I actually care more about the law of fire. I want to know how you managed to refine and condense such a large law of fire." The air in the entire flame hall suddenly froze. The Flame Giant Groans stared silently at Grim, and after a long time, he finally cracked a smile. "Law of fire? That's not a bad name. But for us fire elementals, fire is fire. There's no need to give them so many strange names. The law of fire you speak of, we call it the origin flame. If you want to know the secret of the origin flame, you'll have to exchange it with that item." Groms was a flame lord. After all, with his status and power, he could easily become a flame god if he went to an ordinary plane. Hence, his every action and word would affect the law of the fire elemental plane, and he had a strong contract with Groms. Therefore, Grim nodded silently, and reached a preliminary agreement with Grooms. Before he left, Grim couldn't help but ask, "Lord Grooms, may I know what the item you're looking for is?" The flame giant was silent for a moment, then suddenly threw a flame crystal over. "Don't look here, don't ask, and don't talk. Go find the new Witch of Destiny. She'll give you all the answers." Grim nodded in understanding, bowing once more before leaving the Great Hall of Fire. The Shadow Devil followed behind him silently, and only after he left the Great Hall of Fire did it merge back into Grim Shadow. "Hey, Chip, how's the harvest?" Beep. Level 5 Flame Creature Model completed at 22%. Comprehension of Law of Fire has increased to 71%. Grasp 2 new Law of Fire, Fire Vulnerability and Fire Resilience. Fire Vulnerability. The main body can reduce the target's fire resistance to negative numbers at the cost of reducing its own defense to 0. Fire Resilience. The flames on the target's body that are attacked by the main body will not be extinguished. These were 2 pretty good Law of Fire. Grim sighed silently as he hurried back to his wizard's pagoda. 2 months later, Grim finally returned to the Blazing Flame Monarch after half a year's travel. Tower of Destiny. The dazzling galaxy finally faded away, and Alice's slender and graceful figure once again appeared in front of Grim. "How do you feel? Is the prophecy a heavy burden on you?" Grim stepped forward and supported Alice with a concerned look. While gently tying up her hair, Alice rolled her eyes at him and said unhappily, "I'm already a grade 4 witch. Why do you think I'm so weak?" Yes. Men are so hypocritical. You obviously wanted to ask if the prophecy was successful, but you're pretending to be a good person. Oomph. The annoying little elf, Helen, scolded loudly as she flew around the 2 merrily, sprinkling layers of light along the way. Who did it learn this from? Why is it so talkative? Grim rolled his eyes and waved his hand, trying to grab the little elf, but she nimbly dodged his hand. Who else could it be? That arcane apprentice that's getting more and more cynical. No, she can't be called an arcane apprentice anymore. She actually broke through on her own without anyone's guidance. She is now an arcana master, an arcane apprentice advanced in the sorcerer world. The muscles on Grim's face couldn't help but twitch twice. He couldn't believe his own ears. It seemed like the sorcerer world had obtained the corresponding arcane knowledge system during the war that destroyed the arcane empire. At least the basic arcane system was basically complete, which was the only way to support the advancement of arcane spells in the dimension. This foreign arcane apprentice was only the first. As long as the rules of advancement were met, there would be a second, a third. Chapter 12:31. The Flame Tyrant Groms is looking for the divine Flamestone. It's an extremely rare magic material. It only appears in places where the energy of light and fire is very strong. I believe Groms is looking for the divine Flamestone to use its power to modify a part of his law of fire. If he can convert a portion of the power of fire into light, his movement speed will undoubtedly increase. Not long ago, an expedition team from the Magus Association discovered an ancient ruin in another world. The divine Flamestone was one of the spoils of war. Now, the divine Flamestone is in the hands of a rank 4, which called Olivier. After listening to Alice's explanation, Grim could not help but frown. Since Medusa wants to use the divine Flamestone to threaten Groms, why didn't she keep it for herself? Why did she let it slip away? Because that's how she does things. Alice smiled calmly. She's a rank 7 great, who has controlled the power of destiny for tens of thousands of years. The web of relationships she weaves must be so complicated that it's hard for ordinary people to imagine. Everyone knows that witches of destiny don't have much combat power. In that case, what method did Medusa use to mobilize and control so many existences? It's all thanks to the subtle and mysterious power of destiny. She uses the power of destiny to spy on the secrets of those powerhouses. Once she finds out what they need, she will do everything she can to push the power of destiny, making it impossible for them to reach it. That way, if they can't get what they want, they can only turn to her for help, and then listen to Medusa's arrangements. Using similar methods, she weaves a terrifying web that binds the powerhouses of the various planes. Everyone is just a puppet in her web, a node. I dare say that the expedition team from the Magus Association was able to discover the ancient ruin because of Medusa. That way, she only needs to reveal a bit of information, and she doesn't even need to do anything herself. She's able to hide the divine flamestone that Groms wants in a place where he can't reach. The Magus world, the Magus Association. Don't be fooled by the fact that Groms is a rank 5 flame tyrant. That's not enough to scare the witch called Olivier. That's why Groms knows where the divine flamestone is, but he can't get it. That's why he can only turn back to Medusa. How complicated! Grim listened quietly and could not help but sigh. Alice, you won't become a fate voyeur in the future, will you? What are you thinking? Alice sighed. If her methods worked, she wouldn't have caused the will of the Magus world to turn against her. Those who play with destiny are destined to be spurned by it. So, you became her gravedigger, carrying the will of the sorcerer world to deal with her? So I'll be Medusa, and voyeur will Medusa, God King. Voy will for her will, and I voyeur for King will. But once I step out of the Magus world, many things will become more and more complicated and more difficult to control. Grim shook his head and laughed. That's probably a common problem for you fate witches. You need to know the ins and outs of a matter and control all the variables and unknowns. Only when the danger is reduced to 0 will you be willing to do it yourself. Actually, for me, it's worth it if I have a 70% or 80% chance of success. Alice said sternly, Grim, you can't have such thoughts. We like to have 100% control of things before we act. Not because we pursue perfection, but because we know that fate is treacherous and unpredictable. For you, even if you have a 99% chance of success, if it falls into the hands of the Destiny Witches, we can rely on the remaining 1% to destroy the whole thing. For us Fate Witches, there's no such thing as 99% or 1%. It's either 100% or absolutely impossible. There's no room in between. She's that powerful. Grim could not help but say, but I don't think that Medusa is so powerful that she can't be defeated. That's because we're protected by the Magus world's river of destiny. That's why she can't pry into our secrets. Many of the things she thought she saw were distorted or obscured by the river of destiny. That's why she's always misjudged your strength. Not only did she fail to eliminate you, she even allowed you to grow stronger. What about this time? How are we going to get the divine stone of luminous flame? Although he had heard many unimaginable and unacceptable things, Grim still maintained an optimistic attitude. I don't know. Alice shrugged. You don't know? Grim's eyes widened. This was the first time he heard this from Alice. How could you not know? There are many suspicious points behind this matter, and there are many things I can't see through. First of all, if Medusa wanted to hide the divine stone of luminous flame from Grim, she definitely had dozens or even hundreds of ways. However, she sent it to the Magus world, and it ended up in the hands of the Magus Association. I can smell a strong conspiracy. You're saying that she already foresaw this and wants to cause conflict between us and the Magus Association? Grim's eyes narrowed, his expression solemn. That is a very obvious thing. Because of the self-destruction attack, the Magus Association is already at odds with you. Furthermore, the Crimson family has risen too quickly, and it has attracted the attention and vigilance of the 3 major Magus organizations. If you go to them now, I'm afraid the Magi of the Association will not give you any face. Will they surround and attack me? Grim scratched his head. They won't. After all, the Magus Association is one of the 3 major Magus organizations. Openly surrounding and killing high-ranked Magi from another organization or region is a huge taboo. Then what do I have to be afraid of? Grim smiled casually, his words filled with strong confidence. Whether it's a one-on-one fight or a spar, these are the tricks that matter. As long as they're not afraid of losing face, I'll take them all on. Alice sighed leisurely, reaching out to caress Grim's raised eyebrows and said, Grim, Grim, what gives you such confidence that you don't even put a colossus like the Magus Association in your eyes? Grim said proudly, "Of course it's my strength, and your support." Alice continued to sigh. "It's best not to fight if we can avoid it. Those who fight will die. The more enemies you make, the more you'll suffer the backlash one day." "I understand this logic. Don't worry, I'll handle the relationship between the Crimson family and the Magus Association properly." Only after receiving Grimm's guarantee did Alice nod silently. After returning from the north, Grim only stayed in the blazing flame monarch for a few days before boarding an airship towards the eastern regions. Before leaving, he tossed the grade 3 fire cores he'd obtained from the fire elemental plane to Meryl, causing her to jump with joy. In order to deal with any unforeseen circumstances, Grim also brought along the grade 3 insect lich, Bliss. This way, Bliss would deal with any troubles they might encounter along the way, while Grim focused on researching the outline of the grade 5 flame creature template. In his free time, he also modified the grade 4 molten crystal into a giant molten beast. Though it was much weaker than a shadow fiend, it was still a grade 4 creation. It was more than enough to deal with ordinary situations. This was an airship belonging to the Magus Association, and according to the basic rules, it was equipped with a grade 2 Magus and 5 grade 1 Magi. Along with the runic spell formations etched on the body of the airship, it was more than enough to deal with the monsters of the dark forest that they might encounter along the way. The airship, which resembled a brown sailboat, rose from the pier of Mincel Airport. Supported by a powerful wind elemental current, it slowly entered the dark forest. The grade 2 Magus Ralph, who was in charge of protecting the airship, patrolled the deck as per usual. Only after finding nothing out of the ordinary did he return to his room in satisfaction. However, just as he turned around, his eyes inadvertently caught sight of 2 black silhouettes standing quietly at the stern of the airship. He could not help but stop in his tracks. Those who could travel between the scattered tower forest and the association's territory were either official magi or human nobles with extremely high statuses. However, no matter which one it was impossible to hide from Ralph's mental perception. Yet, for some reason, when Ralph's gaze landed on the 2 black silhouettes, he felt a strange sense of fear. It was as if the 2 standing there were not magi, but 2 ferocious beasts that could devour him until not even his bones were left. Ralph stared blankly for a moment. His right hand, which was hidden in his sleeves, immediately grabbed the rune crystal that could control the spell formations on the airship and silently read through the information within. With his grade 2 spiritual force, he was able to filter through the list of magi who boarded the airship in an instant and quickly found a registration information of the 2 passengers, Grim and Billy. These 2 were very ordinary and unremarkable names. However, in the annotation below the 2 names, Ralph saw a glaring word: Crimson Family. Crimson Family? This family had been very powerful in the scattered tower forest. What were they doing in the association's territory at this time? To be able to hide from his spiritual senses and not trigger the energy scan of the spell formation, they were most likely high-ranked magi who had hidden their identities. However, he could count the number of high-ranked magi in the Crimson family. Ralph pretended to be looking at the scenery below him, but he was secretly observing the 2. For some reason, he felt that one of the strange and distorted figures was somewhat familiar. All of a sudden, his eyebrows twitched as he realized who it was. Insect Lich Bliss. One of them was actually the most troublesome fellow to deal with amongst the grade 3 magi in the Crimson family. What was he doing in a Magus association? Chapter 1232. Master, that Magus seems to have recognized me. Look. Wormwitch Billis licked his lips lightly, looking like he was hungry and thirsty. Keep an eye on him. If they're just reporting information, let them be. If they have any other intentions, I don't mind bathing this route in blood, Grim said resolutely as he surveyed the surroundings. Understood. Leave it to me. Wormlich Billis laughed sinisterly, and the body hidden under the black robe squirmed slightly. A torso the size of a pinky finger fell to the ground and broke into countless tiny black beetles, quietly swarming in all directions along the floor. In less than a quarter of an hour, the entire airship had been thoroughly scrutinized. Ralph, the magus in charge of controlling the airship, had a swarm of black beetles latched onto his shoes and became the focus of the swarm surveillance. However, he was completely unaware of it. It was midnight, and the airship flew above the thick clouds. Below, it was a vast and boundless dark forest. A faint layer of invisibility enveloped the airship, erasing all traces of it. With this layer of invisibility, most magical creatures with low intelligence would not be able to detect the airship's existence, ensuring the safety of the voyage. As for those that could detect the airship's existence through the faint magic undulations, they had already been beaten to a pulp by the magi of the association. Naturally, they did not dare to rob a transport with the association's insignia. At night, in order to maintain the airship's secrecy, all the magi on board were forbidden from using any spells. Hence, in their boredom, they would either walk up to the flight deck and admire the dark forest under the cover of night, or hide in their residences to do research or meditate. At the bottom of the airship, in a tightly guarded room, Ralph sat in front of a wooden table, communicating with someone in the headquarters through a strange rhombus-shaped crystal. "Are you sure it's that legendary fire lich?" On the other side of the crystal was an elderly magus, who was frowning as he listened to Ralph's explanation. He could not help but interrupt. I'm not too sure, but it's very likely." "Why do you think so?" "Because it has been confirmed that one of the two black robes is the insect witch Bliss, and he could be considered one of the core fighting forces of the Crimson family. However, according to my observations, the insect sorcerer seemed to be very respectful to the other person, and he seemed to be treating the other person as his master. That's why I speculated that the other person might be the Crimson Tribe's leader, Grim." According to what you said, it's very likely that the other one is Grim. At least in the Crimson family, he seemed to be the only one who fulfilled these characteristics. "When will you arrive at the destination?" 37 days later. Understood. Then continue to monitor them. Forget it. You don't need to do anything, and don't pay special attention to these two people. I will make the necessary arrangements. Be careful. Don't provoke these fellows. Rank 4 magi aren't good people. Yes, I understand. Little did Ralph know that while he was hiding in the room that was protected by multiple spell formations, there were a dozen tiny black dots on the floor that were hard to see with the naked eye that were monitoring his every move. In a simple cabin on the second floor of the ship, the insect witch Bliss was sitting cross-legged on an empty wooden bed. His body under the black robes would swell and wriggle from time to time, making him look like an outsider. On the ferocious insect head that was exposed, the many compound eyes around the insect pupils were flickering alternately, faintly reflecting hundreds of strange images. Some were quietly moving about in the cabin, some were chatting with each other on the deck, and most of them were reading books or in deep meditation. One had to know that most magi had a perverted fear for their own safety. Hence, unless it was absolutely safe, they would not enter deep meditation. The insects that the insect witch Bliss had released were able to hide from the surveillance spell formations on the airship, as well as the alarm spell formations that the magi had set up in the cabin. They were able to get so close to them and monitor their every move. This meant that the other party's life was in his hands. With Bliss's methods, killing any one of them would be as easy as flipping his palm. If he was more meticulous, Bliss could even arrange for their deaths to be an accidental backlash from a spell experiment, making it so that no one would be able to see through it. This feeling of having the enemy's life in his hands and having the situation under his control was what Bliss loved the most. However, no matter how arrogant he was, there was still an area on the airship that he did not dare to approach. That was the room that the Scarlet family's head, Grim, was resting in. Perhaps the other magi on the airship were too low-ranked and could not sense the terrifying energy radiation from Grim's body. In their eyes, Grim was just a quiet and reclusive rank 1 magus. However, in Bliss's eyes, Grimm was a moving volcano that had been suppressed for thousands of years and was about to explode. The cabin that he resided in was filled with a terrifying flame energy that made even Bliss's scalp go numb. Every time he commanded the insects to crawl around the airship, Bliss would do his best to stay away from Grimm's room. He was truly afraid, worried that the swarm's approach would trigger the silent volcano. If this terrifying energy were to erupt, the airship and the magi on it would be vaporized in an instant. Not even their bones would be left behind. In the cabin that Grimm resided in, he finally opened his eyes leisurely. The flaming coral magic staff, which was standing in front of Ji-Hao, was already glowing red. The intense heat had even twisted the air around it, making the scene in the room extremely weird. The divine fire orb at the tip of the staff formed an illusory chain of fire with Grimm's core of laws. Waves of extremely pure flame energy that were like boiling lava flowed through the chain. Every time it circulated, the energy itself seemed to undergo some strange changes. Its color changed from scarlet to white, gradually turning into a golden yellow. This change in color meant that the flame energy was continuously increasing. Ever since he saw the flames sovereign in the depths of the Sea of Ashes, Grimm had a rough idea of the energy form of high-ranked creatures. If he wanted to continue improving himself, he would need to deepen his understanding of flames and also increase his spiritual force. Without extremely high spiritual force, it would be impossible to control the violent and dangerous fire elemental particles. Without extremely high spiritual force, it would be impossible to compress and purify the unruly fire elemental particles. When he was still at a low level, Grimm's understanding of the fire elemental particles was that he could control them and manipulate them at will. However, as his understanding of flames deepened and his spiritual force increased, he began to understand the nature of flames more and more. Yes, flames had their own nature. Just like the gentle and gentle water elemental particles, the unruly and unruly wind elemental particles, and the sluggish and firm earth elemental particles, the fire elemental particles that Grimm desperately wanted to control were extremely passionate and unrestrained. If one followed their elemental characteristics, everything would become very simple. However, if one were to go against their elemental characteristics, they would find it very difficult to get along with them. The power of the flame lay in its violence and its destruction. In the hands of a gentle magus, these wild and flamboyant elements were naturally unable to display their full might. Only those who were tyrannical and did not care about the consequences would be able to display the might of fire spells to their fullest. In comparison, Grimm had restrained himself too much in his past battles and relied too much on the AI chip's assistance. Although this increased his safety, it also hindered his body and mind from fusing with the fire elemental particles. This was especially so after reaching the 4th grade. With every step he took, Grimm could feel the resistance and restlessness of the fire elemental particles. Being unable to tame the fire elemental particles caused Grimm's understanding of flames to stagnate. However, Grimm did not regret his decision after he figured it out. A good flame was one that he could control. If he had to sacrifice a portion of his rationality to increase his affinity with flames, Grimm would rather be rejected by the fire elemental particles. However, this did not mean that Grimm would give up on flames. Since he could not accept the transformation of the fire elemental particles and could not entrust his safety to the violence and ferocity of the fire elemental particles, Grimm could only take another path and use other methods to increase the level of his fire elemental energy. If his own understanding of flames was insufficient and he could not continue to compress and purify the fire elemental particles, he would find a substitute. Grimm's choice was the Vulcan orb. Grimm formed a fire chain between the core of Law and the Vulcan orb, sending the fire elemental particles into the orb and using its power to compress and purify them. He then transferred the compressed and purified flames back to the core of Law, using the power of laws contained within to strengthen the core of Law. Limited by Grimm's current spiritual force and the tolerance of the core of Law, he could only do this step by step. It would take a long and arduous time. Hence, the insect lich Bliss could sense that there was a terrifying amount of fire elemental particles in Grimm's room. Its strength, intensity, and level of power had clearly surpassed Grimm's current rank. Chapter 1233. A month later, the airship slowly drove into a large spaceport. 5 other airships arrived at Bansai Port at the same time, coming from different regions. When the airship steadily docked on a soft lawn, numerous magi walked down from the ship's planks and joined the bustling crowd in front of them. Grimm and Bliss alighted from the airship one after another. Before they could take in the sights of the spaceport, a small goblin with furry ears and a body full of green fur pounced towards them. "Lord Bliss, is that you? I've seen you from afar in the family's encampment. You're still the same as before, so eerie that it makes one feel afraid. It's my honor to see you here at Bansai Port today. How long do you plan to stay here? Do you have any special places you'd like to go?" Like a fan who'd seen his idol, the little goblin pounced towards Bliss and started rambling. He spoke quickly and excitedly, and even the 2 magi could not get a word in. Before they left, Grimm had indeed instructed Merrill to get the person in charge of the family to come out and receive them. However, even he did not expect the person in charge of the Crimson family's territory to be a goblin. And from the looks of it, it seemed to worship Bliss to the extreme. The insect lich, Bliss, had always been a loner and rarely interacted with the lower ranks of the family. Hence, Bliss was at a loss as to what to do when the little goblin pounced on him passionately. Then, he became angry. He raised his arm slightly, and a blade-like insect hand wrapped in strange black scales landed on the little goblin's head, immediately stopping its rambling. "Shut up. From now on, you'll answer every question I ask. One more word, and I'll dig your brain out." The sharp insect-like appendages swam around the little goblin's head, and its body immediately stiffened, not daring to move an inch. It blinked its bean-like eyes pitifully at Bliss's terrifying green eyes hidden under the shadow of his hood. There were also many tiny compound eyes flashing around the pupil. They were densely packed and looked extremely frightening. "What's your name? What's your status here?" Bliss asked coldly. "I'm Thor, the person in charge of the gnome merchant group here. Did the family inform you to pick us up?" "Yes." The little gnome gulped. "Who gave the order directly?" Blitz's tone suddenly turned sharp. "The one who gave me the order was Great Sage Cabby. As for who in the family gave the order to Great Sage Cabby, I have no idea. What is the content of the family's notice?" Great Sage Cabby said that Lord Billis, you are here on important business, and asked us to be in charge of receiving you well. We don't know anything else. All right, bring us back to the family's encampment. Remember, keep a low profile. Yes. Although he was surprised by Bliss's fierceness, the Goblin Thor was obviously a seasoned trading veteran. He quickly forgot about his previous unhappiness and continued to lead them to a strange goblin sports car. Even Grimm did not expect that what appeared in front of him was a strange sports car that had gone through many modifications and had a strong goblin style. It had a low red body without a roof, huge round metal wheels, sparkling crystal windshields, and a bunch of huge rocket models welded to the back of the car. Even though the sports car was not ignited, its exaggerated appearance attracted many magi to stop and look. However, when they sensed the thick layer of bloody aura on Bliss's body, they all shifted their gazes, not daring to point at him. The nearest mega-city was tens of miles away from the spaceport. Many magi rode on their mounts or summoned creatures, whipping their horses as they hurried into the distance. In a moment, there were giant bats, twin-headed falcons, wind splitterbirds, wyverns, and other ferocious birds in the sky. On the ground, there were rhinoceros beasts, nightmare beasts, multi-legged horses, and other strange wizard beasts. Among the crowd, Grimm even saw a fellow riding a black-skinned wild boar. He was indeed a maverick. "My lord, look." Bliss saw the goblin sports car and immediately felt a headache coming on. He was secretly annoyed. These hateful goblins did not seem to know the meaning of the word low profile. Let's go. Since we're here, there's no need to keep it a secret anymore. Besides, our whereabouts are already under their surveillance. If we want to be ostentatious, let's be ostentatious. Grim looked around, and his gaze swept across the towering surveillance tower in the distance. He sensed a few cold gazes that refused to leave. With a smile, Grim and the other two boarded the red goblin sports car. The goblin, Thor, put on his windshield and goggles. He cheerfully turned to Bliss, who was cramped in the small seat, and loudly said, "Lord Bliss, are you ready? Let's set off." Without waiting for Bliss' reply, Thor fiercely stepped on the accelerator. The huge rockets at the back of the goblin sports car spat out a long scarlet tail of flames, and the three of them were sent flying with a frightening force. That's right, they were sent flying and not running away. The violent propulsion of the flames shook the goblin sports car, causing it to tremble slightly. The surrounding scenery instantly became somewhat blurry. If Grim had not grabbed onto the steel frame of the car, his fingers digging deep into it to stabilize himself, the fierce wind blowing towards him would definitely have thrown him into the flames behind the car. Even Bliss had to stretch out both his arms, his blade-like insect hands stabbing into the steel to stabilize himself in his seat. Even so, his hood was raised by the fierce wind, fluttering behind him, revealing his sinister and terrifying ugly insect body. Just as Bliss was about to open his mouth to curse, the fierce wind blew into his mouth, causing his stomach to swell up and his insect head to turn red. That goblin, Thor, did not seem to feel anything. He used two belts to firmly tie himself to the seat, shouting loudly as he stepped on the accelerator and fiercely turned the steering wheel. The goblin sports car spat out thick black smoke as it was propelled by the raging flames. It rolled up a tall pillar of dust as it raced through the crowd of wizards. The Magi, who were caught off guard, hurriedly put up their defensive barriers to prevent themselves from being roasted in a charcoal by the long scarlet tail of flames. Only when the goblin sports car disappeared at the end of the long road did the Magi, who were coughing from the dust, rush out of the wall of dust in a sorry state. They angrily discovered that the wizard beasts they were riding on had been burnt black. It was a horrible sight to behold. "Bastard! Go to hell!" All sorts of curses with strange accent could be heard, but it was obvious that the culprit could not hear them. At the top of the tall surveillance tower, a few Magi looked at each other in dismay. "What's the reaction of the magic wand of prophecy?" The middle-aged magus asked coldly. "Grade 4. The opponent is definitely a grade 4 magus." The young magus with a scorched wooden stick hurriedly replied. "What about the surveillance crystal? Red? The opponent's energy reaction is a glaring red, like a sea of fire." Another magus with a strange magic mirror hurriedly bowed and replied. "That means it's very likely." The leader of the Magi said sternly, "Immediately inform Lord Hemmers that the opponent is indeed the legendary fire magus. Tell him to prepare." "Yes, yes," the Magi replied in unison, and immediately split up to get to work. This Grim is quite famous in the Central Continent. I wonder what he's trying to do by suddenly coming to our territory. The leader of the Magi was still suspicious. Just now, when it had secretly scanned the mysterious magus with the power of the surveillance tower, the other party had also sensed it. A spiritual feeler filled with a burning sensation extended over, lightly colliding with the defensive spell formation inside the tower before slowly retreating. As the leader of the Magi could naturally sense how terrifying that burning willpower was. Magi who could fuse their elemental characteristics into their willpower could be considered top-notch, even in the Magus Association. Now that such a fellow had suddenly barged into the association's territory, no matter what his intentions were, it would definitely cause a huge commotion within the association. Forget it, this matter has already exceeded my capabilities. I'll leave it to those fellows at the headquarters to worry about. The leader of the Magi sighed inwardly, turning around and leaving silently. The goblin sports car was still gliding at high speed in the air, 5 meters above the ground. As the goblin Thor continuously turned the steering wheel, the bodies of the three in the car swayed rapidly as well, shaking along with the sports car. Although the Buglich Bliss had the strength of a Grade 3 Magus, he was not used to flying at such a high speed. The violent jolts and the frightening, irregular tremors made his stomach churn like a raging sea. When the goblin Thor made a beautiful drift and swung the car 170 degrees, the worm which Bliss finally couldn't withstand the terrifying torment. It opened its mouth and spat out everything that hadn't been digested in its stomach. From afar, a thin yellow mist was spat out from the red lightning, and the dust that was stirred up slowly settled down. A quarter of an hour later, the goblin sports car came to a screeching halt in front of a towering metal castle. The Buglich Bliss dashed out of the sports car at lightning speed, running to the side and vomiting. Chapter 1234. Grim and Bliss quickly settled down in the metal castle. The metal castle was a large stronghold of the Goblin Merchant Association. Following the goblins' usual business style, there was a row of shops in front of the castle, while the main part of the castle was used as a warehouse and living area. The castle's security was handled by a team of 20 magic machines. Apart from these magic machines with metal skulls and bodies, there were also 5 goblin warlocks stationed inside the castle. These goblin warlocks were the true guardians of the castle, responsible for protecting the higher-ups of the Goblin Merchant Association. Over the years, the Goblin Merchant Association had worked tirelessly and infiltrated into the territory of the Sorcerer Association. 11 goblin shops of various sizes, as well as the metal castle that served as their headquarters, were all the goblins had achieved. The Crimson family's name was known by everyone in the central part of the continent, but in the far eastern part of the continent, the Goblin Merchant Association could only survive and expand like many human merchants. Fortunately, they had a stable family backing them. Coupled with the goblins' outstanding business methods, the Goblin Merchant Association was finally able to take root here and expand step by step. Some time ago, Thor even asked the family headquarters to send one or more high-grade wizards over to guard the place. After all, the sorcerer world was a powerful region dominated by human wizards. If the Chamber of Commerce only consisted of goblins without any high-grade human wizards, they would be discriminated against and oppressed in the dark when it came to trading goods and purchasing resources. Over the years, the goblins had suffered a lot in this regard. Thus, when Thor heard that the famous Grade 3 insect wizard Bliss had come here, he felt happy and excited from the bottom of his heart. After entering the secret room, Goblin Thor found out that the mysterious wizard who had been following Blitz was actually his family head. Even Grim couldn't bear the sudden enthusiasm from Thor. After sending him away with difficulty, Grim finally had the time to carefully study the Sorcerer Association's operating structure. The Sorcerers Association was one of the 3 major sorcerer organizations in the sorcerer world. It occupied nearly 7 million square kilometers of land in the eastern part of the sorcerer continent. There were 370 million people under its jurisdiction, with more than 30,000 sorcerers. It ruled and occupied more than 1,000 secondary planes. The strength of a Magus organization was measured by a few key indicators: wealth, strength, resources, influence, and the number of magi. Among the 3 major sorcerer organizations, the Silver Alliance had always been famous for being rich and overbearing, occupying the 2 main areas of wealth and resources. The Sorcerer Association, on the other hand, was recognized and supported by the majority of sorcerers. It had a large number of sorcerers, the most complete sorcerer development system, and the most powerful sorcerers in the sorcerer world. Therefore, in terms of overall strength, the Sorcerer Association ranked first among the 3 major sorcerer organizations. As for the Northern Witches, their overall strength was the weakest, but they were extremely united, and their fights were extremely fierce. Thus, if they were to defend the North, they would be able to contend against the Mage Association and the Silver Alliance. Grim came from the scattered pagoda forest, which was famous for its lack of unity. The development of the entire sorcerer community was based on the model and axis. The interests and development of the community were above everything else. The Sorcerer Association, on the other hand, had a typical academic style. The power of the sorcerer families was suppressed to the extreme. The ones who could really promote the development of the association were the sorcerers with great strength and personality, not the sorcerer families behind them. In the central part of the continent, sorcerers were attached to the families. Without the support of the families, it was extremely difficult to develop. However, in the Sorcerer Association, the numerous sorcerer families became the supporting organizations of some genius sorcerers. Only when the sorcerer that they supported climbed to a high position in the association could the family have a relatively loose and bright future. The positions of the two sides had suddenly been reversed. In the scattered pagoda forest, no matter how powerful a sorcerer was, as long as he did not reach grade 4, he was destined to become a slave or a stepping stone for the family. He had to endure hundreds of years of labor exploitation. This kind of atmosphere was undoubtedly very oppressive, and many elite sorcerers who did not have a family background were excluded from the mainstream. The Sorcerer Association, on the other hand, did not have that many prejudices and rules. When it came to selecting and training sorcerers, they only looked at the individual's aptitude and development potential. Moreover, they had a very complete internal training system. Thus, it became the first choice for many powerless sorcerers without a family background to join a large organization. However, Grimm also knew that the true deciding factor of Sorcerer Association was the number of powerful sorcerers in the organization. In this aspect, the Sorcerer Association was the number one. According to incomplete statistics, the Sorcerer Association had more than 40 grade 4 sorcerers, which was almost 3 times the number of the scattered pagoda forest. As for whether there was a hidden top-level power behind them, that was the top secret of the Sorcerer Association. Outsiders had no way of knowing. Compared to the huge Sorcerer Association, the scattered pagoda forest was like a little brother of a giant. If it was not for the 3 major sorcerer organizations holding each other back, the scattered pagoda forest might not even have the strength to resist the Sorcerer Association's attack. As for Grimm and the Crimson family, they did not have the qualifications to be arrogant in front of the colossal Sorcerer Association. If Grimm did not have absolute confidence in himself, he would not have dared to come to the enemy's territory to find a chance to cooperate. Olivier was the powerful witch who owned the Flamestone of Light. Grimm had a rough idea of what she was up to. Olivier, grade 4, elemental sorcerer. Gender, female, age unknown. She was the eldest daughter of the Armstrong family. She had a younger brother, who was currently only a grade 1 sorcerer. Since she was young, she had the talent to become a sorcerer. It only took her about 300 years to successfully become a grade 4 sorcerer. This terrifying speed of advancement made her the fastest in the Sorcerer Association in the past 1,000 years. She was also the young sorcerer with the most potential. The report was voluminous and densely packed, but the description of this Olivia witch's ability was short and simple: gravity control. It seemed that this sorcerer Olivier's forte was the relatively obscure gravity control. Gravity control was a special kind of elemental sorcery. It was a branch of magnetism sorcery, which required the sorcerer to have a special elemental physique. That was why there were very few sorcerers in the sorcerer world who practiced this spell, and those who could reach grade 4 were even rarer. Perhaps in the entire sorcerer world, she was the only sorcerer who could reach grade 4 in gravity control. All grade 4 sorcerers were the treasures of their organizations, and they were the top combat power of their organizations. Moreover, young sorcerers like Olivier, with astonishing potential, were the treasures of the Sorcerer Association. They enjoyed all kinds of resources and knowledge. Olivier was also very powerful, and the combat power she displayed was even more astonishing. She had personally led more than 10 expeditions against civilizations in other planes. That was why she was also a powerful combat sorcerer, and she had rich experience in killing and fighting. After reading through the intelligence reports on Olivier, Grimm couldn't help but frown. Powerful. Such a powerful sorcerer, It would not be easy to deal with such a person. If he could not take out something that could suppress the situation, Olivier would not even pay attention to him. In this way, it would be even more difficult to obtain the divine flame stone from her. Thus, less than half an hour after chasing Thor away, Grimm called him back. Since you have been stationed in the East for 17 years, have you heard of a grade 4 sorcerer called Olivier? Hearing Grimm's question, Goblin Thor immediately showed a bitter expression. Which torturing, Olivier? I'm afraid there are very few people in the East who have not heard of this name. Which torturing? This title is very new. Why would she be given such a title? Is she very powerful? One of the main reasons why she's known as the Witch of Torture is that most of the enemies she kills are crushed by her terrible witchcraft and turned into a pool of meat paste. Not even a whole corpse can be found. It is precisely because of her extremely cruel and terrifying methods that everyone is very afraid of her. At this point, Thor could not help but raise his head and steal a glance at Grimm. My lord, you're not going to look for trouble with this witch torturing, are you? What nonsense are you thinking? Grimm snapped. This is the territory of the Magus Association. Do you think I'll be able to return to the central continent alive if I come here to cause trouble for Olivier? That's right, as long as you understand. Thor secretly wiped the sweat off his forehead. But I might need to get in touch with this Olivier. Do you have a way for me to meet her? Hearing Grimm's words, Thor could not help but shiver. He grinned and said, My lord, our Goblin Chamber of Commerce has only been in the East for 60 years, and our foundation here is still very shallow. How can we get in touch with a grade 4 sorcerer? Then what do you know about this Olivier? Tell me about it. Yes. Thor swallowed his saliva and slowly began to narrate. Everything else was basically the same as the information Grimm had obtained. The only thing that was special was that according to Thor's understanding, Olivier was a firm and resolute person. He was also fierce and ruthless towards his enemies. However, she still had a relative that she cared about, and that was her younger brother, Wales, who was only a grade 1 sorcerer. Although Olivier's talent and potential were amazing, her younger brother's talent as a sorcerer was a mess. If not for Olivier pouring a large amount of resources into him, it would have been difficult for him to even qualify as a grade 1 sorcerer. If Olivier had any weaknesses, it would probably be this younger brother of hers. Chapter 1235. It was a spacious and bright Magus hall. The walls of the hall were inlaid with countless runic crystals. Each crystal shone with a faint radiance, projecting a strange image. When all the images were pieced together, they formed a strange wall with thousands of postures. In most of the images, there was a male or female Magus silently observing them. Their backgrounds seemed to be in different places. Half of the images were black, as if there was no connection. In the center of the crystal curtain wall, a white-robed wizard who was wearing an old-fashioned pointy hat, had an old face, a pair of tortoise-shell glasses on the bridge of his nose, and a silver-white beard hanging down to his chest, heavily tapped the magic staff in his hand and questioned loudly, Speak. You've investigated for so long. You should have a conclusion by now. What is that fire magus trying to do by coming here? The magi in the images on the wall were busy with their own things, and only a little of their attention was diverted here. A few high-ranked magi wearing different colored robes bowed in front of the white-robed magus. They looked at each other, and finally, one of them stepped forward to speak. This was a strange male magus wearing black armor and a clown mask. Judging from his physique and aptitude, he had the strength of a rank 3 magus. Lord Domner, according to the information from the surveillance team and the prophecy team, it seems that Grimm is here to look for someone. Look for someone? Who? Someone from the organization or someone else? Someone from the organization. Oh, who is it? Hearing the conversation between the vice chairman and the clown magus, many of the magi in the images became interested and began to focus their attention on them. Lord Olivier. The clown magus could not help but lower his head at this point, and cold sweat seemed to be dripping down from his mask. Olivier, hey, when did you get to know Olivier? That's right, Olivier. Have you met that fire magus before? In an instant, many magi began to discuss among themselves, and many of them could not help but tease each other. On the other side of the curtain wall, there was a projection of a beautiful and tall witch with shoulder-length black hair and a golden ring on her head. She was originally lying lazily on her side on the bed, listening to the conversation in the hall from time to time. However, when the clown magus said that name, she suddenly sat up straight, and her beautiful and gentle face suddenly became serious. "All of you shut up," the young female magus shouted, suppressing the gloating laughter of her colleagues. She then turned her gaze to the clown magus, and her purple eyes glowed with a terrifying aura unique to a rank for magus. "Did you say that legendary fire magus is looking for me?" Under the horrifying gaze of the sadistic witch, the clown wizard broke out in a cold sweat. He forced a smile and said, "My lady, this is not what I said. It's the prophecy of the 7 members of the prophecy team. There shouldn't be any mistakes. Unfortunately, no matter how she stirred, it was still a blank space." Apart from hearing about some of the great achievements of this legendary fire wizard, there seemed to be no other information that was related to him or had anything to do with him. "Olivier, you know that fire magus?" The old white-robed magus frowned as he asked. "I don't know him. I've never had any contact with him before," the young witch said flatly. "That's good." Domner, the white-robed wizard, let out a sigh of relief. This Grimm has been causing quite a ruckus in the central continent for the past few decades. It was said that he had gathered a sizable force, and the Crimson family had become the only super-wealthy family in the scattered forest towers. Many people are saying that he might become the core power of the central continent. To be honest, the association is also discussing how to deal with this guy. What do you mean? Since this guy has come to our east, we naturally have to take this opportunity to get in touch with him and observe his development potential. If he's really as powerful as the rumors say, then the association will have to consider suppressing the Crimson family. The association's actions are up to you. I don't care. But since this guy has come to find me, I'll go meet him and see what his intentions are. If there's a need, I can help you test his limits." The young Olivier said arrogantly. "That's good. In that case, I'll arrange for a few people to assist you and be your assistants." "No need. Are you still worried about my abilities?" "It doesn't matter if he was a dragon or a worm in the past. He'll turn into mud in my place." With that, the light screen that Olivier was on suddenly dimmed. It was obvious that he had lost contact with the Magus Hall. After Olivier went offline, the Magi who had not had enough immediately began to discuss amongst themselves. It was obvious that they could not wait to see an exciting battle that would be like Mars colliding with Earth. After all, the association had more than 40 grade 4 Magi, and that Olivier could definitely squeeze into the top 10. Using this kind of power to directly clash with a little fire wizard who came from a backwater, no one would think that this so-called legendary fire wizard would win. After casually extinguishing the spell crystal, Olivier reclined on the soft couch and began to ponder silently. This was a beautifully decorated lounge. The interior was luxurious and luxurious, filled with the extravagant style of high-ranking nobles. After the soundproofing barrier disappeared, through the thick golden oak door, Olivier was able to hear the boisterous sounds of the musical instruments downstairs, as well as the tidal waves of voices flooding into the room, causing Olivier to frown slightly. However, before she could do anything, the 2 sturdy golden oak doors were smashed open by a huge force. 3 young men and women who were chasing each other barged in. The young man in the lead had a fair and handsome face, and his body was strong and straight. He was dressed in a beautiful black magus robe that was well tailored, making him look even more outstanding. From the style of his magus robe, as well as the exquisite magic runes and magical gems at the corners, it was obvious that it was not a standard robe issued by the Magus Association, but a custom-made, high-grade product. Just from this alone, it was obvious that this person's family was rich. It was really shocking. However, it was a pity that he did not care for such an exquisite magus robe at all. The front and corners of the robe were stained with wine and grease. At this moment, he was obviously drunk beyond recognition. In his arms were two beautiful witches with hot bodies, and he laughed loudly as he stumbled into the room. The three of them were only at grade 1. The two young witches were originally laughing to their heart's content, but when they saw Olivier's cold face, they shivered and hurriedly bowed, their faces filled with fear. Although the young magus was only at grade 1, he did not show the slightest bit of fear when he saw Olivier. He shook off the two witches and rushed towards the grade 4 witch. He grabbed the corner of her sleeve and shook it violently. Sister, so you were hiding here. I was wondering why I didn't see you in the hall. The young magus was so drunk that he could no longer support himself. He half collapsed on Olivier's body, and the strong smell of alcohol from his mouth sprayed directly onto her face. Both of you can leave, Olivier said coldly. The two grade 1 witches hurriedly bowed and carefully left the room, closing the wooden door behind them. Olivier sighed and raised her hands to hug the young magus's head. With a wave of magic, a faint yellow smell of alcohol seeped out of the young magus's pores and condensed into a ball of alcohol in her palms. After the smell of alcohol was extracted, the young magus trembled and instantly became sober. Sister, why is it you? The young Welsh could not help but hug his head, still immersed in the intense headache of being drunk. Welsh, you should know that losing a clear mind because of alcohol is a big taboo for us magi. Olivier's face was full of reproach, but her actions were not as cold as her words. Instead, she took the initiative to massage the young magus's forehead. Sister, don't worry about me. The young Welsh raised his head and laughed bitterly. What can a useless person like me do, even if I maintain a clear mind every day? Is there still room for improvement? Olivier's hands froze, and a look of despair appeared on his face. The talent and potential of this younger brother of his was so poor that he was practically an insulator from magic. Even after Olivier had spent countless resources and paid a huge price, he had only managed to raise his strength to the middle of grade 1. At this stage, the development of his strength had also reached its limit. No matter how many resources were thrown at him, not even a sound could be heard, let alone bringing him the slightest bit of improvement. Welsh, don't give up on yourself. Believe me, I will definitely find something that can improve your aptitude and let you continue to live. Olivier stroked his face with a pained expression. Welsh laughed bitterly and shook his head. Sister, you have said this tens of thousands of times. You also know that my aptitude can no longer be improved by even half a step. I'm already 337 years old. If it wasn't for the life extension ritual that you performed for me decades ago, I'm afraid I would have become a skeleton in a grave by now. Now, my soul has been strengthened so many times that it has long reached its limit. Even if you find a better and more useful life-extending treasure in the future, my soul will no longer be able to take it. So, sister, don't force me to meditate and study magic anymore. I'm not cut out for this. If I have the time, why don't you let me indulge and happily exhaust the last of my life? With that, Welsh gently pushed away the grief-stricken Olivier and once again stumbled out of the room. Chapter 12:36. Grimm temporarily settled down in the Goblin Merchant Guild. Through the local connections of the Goblin's supervisor, Thor, he began to secretly investigate the whereabouts of the witch who killed her. The Goblin Merchant Guild under the Crimson family might be prosperous in the Central Continent, but in the territory of the Magus Association, where many powerful figures gathered, they could only keep a low profile. Even with Thor's experience, the most he could come into contact with was a rank 2 Magus. Which Magus of a higher level would care about a group of foreign goblins who didn't have any roots in the local area? To be honest, without the protection of the Crimson family's emblem, most goblins would face great danger and discrimination in the Magus world. However, just as Grimm was thinking about how to get close to the terrifying witch, an exquisite invitation card appeared in front of him. You must be Wizard Grimm? A middle-aged male wizard in a white robe with two silver intersecting halos tattooed on his chest bowed to Grimm with a calm expression. For his aura, Grimm could tell that he was a rank 2 magus. "You are?" Grimm frowned slightly. "My name is Leo, a subordinate of Lord Olivier. I was ordered by Lord Olivier to deliver this invitation card to you." "Olivier?" Grimm squinted his eyes and smiled calmly. "It seems that the Magus Association has done a good job in gathering information. You even found out why I'm here. Tell me, what do you plan to do?" "My lord also hopes to meet with a powerful figure like you, so he specially held a welcoming banquet at Blueberry Manor. I hope you can attend." "When?" "In 3 days." "Understood. Reply to your lord." "I'll be there on time." Leo nodded, bowed to Grimm once again, then turned around and left. Grimm listened to the sound of footsteps gradually fading away in the corridor outside. He gently tapped on the exquisite red invitation card with blue words. The nimble and elegant words on the card immediately twisted and rotated, projecting the face of a beautiful witch. "You must be Grimm. No matter what your purpose in visiting me is, it is necessary for us to meet. Remember, 3 days later, I'll be waiting for you at Blueberry Manor in the AC Mountain Range. Come if you have the guts." After a short sentence, the projection disappeared, and the energy aura on the invitation card dissipated without a trace, turning back into ordinary paper and words. "Hey, Chip, how is it? Have you captured his soul, aura?" Beep. That projection message just now had a force field protecting it. "I can't collect any soul aura. However, we've gathered a portion of the magic undulations and are currently analyzing them." Beep. Analysis process completed. Target: Olivier. Gender: female. Class: Tier 4 intermediate. Profession: elemental sorcerer. Preliminary mastery of the law of gravity. Talent: magnetic pulse. Physique. Basic attributes: strength, unknown. Agility, unknown. Constitution, unknown. Mind: 42. Witchcraft equipment: unknown. Fighting style: unknown. Attack skills: unknown. Seeing the series of unknowns in the Chip statistics, Grimm could not help but shake his head and sigh. After all, the Crimson family had only risen to power for a short period of time, and their foundations were still shallow. Apart from having some influence in the scattered forest of towers, they had practically no influence in the other regions. It seemed that it was necessary to nurture a specialized intelligence agency within the family to investigate and understand the basic information of the 3 major Magus organizations. At the very least, if the Gnome Merchant Group was a little more vigilant, they would at least have some detailed information on Olivier. Yes, it was time for the few factions within the family to split up according to their functions. 3 days later, in front of a beautiful manor built at the edge of a large mountain range, a strange wind dragon flapped its green and white wings, stirring up a whistling hurricane as it slowly landed on an empty plot of land by a lake. Dressed in a light, soft robe, the handsome Grimm stepped onto the ground with his dragon wings. Bliss, who was shrouded in a black robe, followed closely behind. There were already more than 10 strange-looking eagle-type wizard beasts resting on the empty plot of land. At this moment, they suddenly sensed the domineering aura of a draconic bloodline, and were all frightened to the point of trembling. They prostrated themselves on the ground, not daring to move an inch. A few female acolytes in charge of welcoming were also intimidated by the domineering draconic aura of the rank 3 wind dragon. They could not help but take a few steps back, their faces pale. After Grimm jumped off the wind dragon, he turned around and waved his hand. The enormous wind dragon, which had a head and tail of more than 20 meters long, immediately trembled, and its scales rapidly transformed into a strange wind elemental essence. Then, with a series of strange whistling sounds, it was absorbed by a crystal-clear elemental crystal core. After absorbing all the wind elemental essence, the elemental crystal core turned into a streak of light and flew into Grimm's palm. The light on it gradually faded, and the crystal core returned to its original form. "This should be the magic puppet crystal core that you created, sir?" It is indeed miraculous, and much more powerful than ordinary summoning magic cores. If I have the chance, I will definitely buy a few from you and research the mysteries within. A handsome young magus walked over with large strides, his face full of smiles as he looked at Grim. You are? Grim glanced at the other party, and Chip quickly deduced many things based on the traces of magic aura that the other party emitted. Rank 3. A strange, icy aura was faintly reflected from the depths of his soul. It should be an ice elemental spell. The difference of one rank was like the difference between heaven and earth. No matter how careful the other party was, it would be difficult for him to keep his secrets in front of a high-ranked magus. I am Tang Yin, a subordinate of Lord Olivier. I have been ordered by his lordship to receive you. Since you are here, please follow me. My lordship has been waiting for you for a long time. Having said this magus Tang Yin bowed and led Grim and Bliss towards the entrance of the manor not far away. Before they even got close to the manor, melodious and cheerful music could be heard, mixed with the laughter of women and the crisp sound of wine glasses clinking against each other. At this moment, the interior of the manor was a sea of joy. In a spacious open-air hall, there was a beautiful fountain that was constantly running. Streams of water that were as thick as the mouth of a bull spurted out from the bottom of the pool, and under the illumination of the ever-changing lights, it presented an illusory scene. Small statues were set up along the side of the pool, and under the direction of the music, they rapidly transformed into strange and beautiful little creatures, chasing and playing in the rising and falling fountain. In the middle of the pool, a beautiful and enchanting mermaid reclined on a reef, using a voice that could move one's heart and soul, singing a beautiful song that was difficult to understand. Beside the pool, there were long wooden tables on which all sorts of delicacies and drinks were placed. Magi and nobles dressed in immaculate clothing smiled as they raised their wine glasses. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and conversed softly, or gathered at the side of the pool to admire the mermaid's performance. Some even held hands as they walked down the dance floor and began to dance gracefully. Grim swept his gaze across the banquet and discovered that most of the guests were magi. Even those who were dressed in noble attire had some sort of elemental aura around them. Obviously, they also had the aptitude to become magi, but due to other reasons, they had withdrawn from the ranks of magi. As for their strength, most of them were around rank 2 or 3, and they were all smart and experienced, looking like specially selected elites. Grim and Magus Olivia, who was led by Tang Yin, passed through a grassy field, bypassed the fountain, and arrived at a slightly quiet and elegant parlor. Inside, which Olivia, who was dressed in a long palace dress, was quietly waiting with a calm expression. "Sir, please come in." Tang Yin smiled and said, "As for this, sir, you should be Wizard Bliss, right? Why don't we go to the front hall for a tour? There are many friends there who are looking forward to getting to know you." Buglich Bliss did not move an inch after hearing Tang Yin's words. Only after Grim nodded slightly did he turn around and follow Wizard Tang in to the front hall. For some reason, the surroundings suddenly became quiet and elegant when they arrived at this place. Although they could still hear the sound from the front hall, it seemed to have suddenly become a lot more distant, and it felt like a dream. The large parlor was filled with all sorts of strange green plants. Among them, there were ornamental plants such as devil's ivy, blueberry, and violet sunflower. There were also carnivorous magical plants such as the face flower, smiling mushroom, and martinella grass. However, no matter how terrifying a magical plant was, it could only obediently lie there in front of a grade 4 sorcerer, appearing docile and obedient. Witch Olivia was holding up the corner of her dress and holding a sprinkler quietly and elegantly watering the plants. The green magic plants were all swaying their strange bodies covered with thorns and tentacles, shaking off the water droplets on their bodies like docile puppies. Witch Olivia was not wearing shoes and socks, and her white feet were exposed as she walked around in the mud. Under the strong and rich smell of flesh and blood, Some of the magic plants seemed to have lost their minds and quietly pulled out their roots from the mud, quietly extending towards the pair of white and tender feet. The roots slithered like little snakes, and under the cover of the mud, they extended to the sides of the feet. Finally, one of the roots could not hold back anymore and suddenly burst out from the ground, like a vicious, poisonous snake stabbing towards her. However, just as the roots were about to touch the witch Olivia's feet, an invisible and strange halo swept past. The moment the strange halo swept past, the roots and the owner of the roots exploded into mud. It was as if two invisible boulders had ruthlessly crushed them. All the stems, branches, roots, and vines were crushed into a pile of green mud that no one could identify. Chapter 12:37. These brainless bastards. Even after suffering so many times, they still don't learn their lesson. Olivier gently put down the sprinkler and patted the dirt off his hands. If I don't teach them a lesson, they will never know who the real master of this place is. Don't you think so, Wizard Grimm? Hearing the other party's question with a double entendre, Grimm smiled calmly. Sometimes, if you don't try, you won't know if it will work or not. If magi were all law-abiding people, I don't think there would be any magi in the outside world. Olivier lightly laughed again. It seems that Wizard Grimm is also a person who likes to take risks. Those who have everything naturally like stability and order, while those who have nothing naturally like adventure and change. So Wizard Grimm has come to our Magus Association for a favor? May I know what it is that you want, sir? This Olivier was obviously a person who liked to be straightforward. Before even finishing his sentence, he could not help but get straight to the point. Grimm was silent for a moment, and then he finally spoke again. Divine Stone of Light. I heard that you, sir, obtained a divine stone of light from a ruin in another dimension. I came here for it. Olivier was stunned for a moment, but he quickly recovered and said calmly, The divine stone of light is indeed in my hands. But what does Sir Grimm plan to use to exchange it for me? I believe you, sir, should know the value of this divine stone of light. Grimm gently waved his hand in front of him, and a magic mirror floated in midair. Inside the mirror was a 3-meter long metal spear covered with strange patterns. Olivier glanced at it and quickly determined the energy level and basic attributes of the spear based on the elemental aura emitted by the mirror. Although this spear also has a hint of the power of law, the alchemist who made it was too poor. He even added such a strict bloodline requirement. This kind of thing can barely be classified as a grade 4 item, but it can be considered one of the worst grade 4 items. My divine stone of light can be considered a high-grade grade 4 item. It can even be classified as a grade 5 item. Grimm sighed softly. With a wave of his hand, the image of the item projected in the magic mirror changed instantly. This time, a pair of massive metal warhammers appeared. They were also engraved with all sorts of strange patterns, and a strange and unpredictable aura of power surged forth. This weapon is slightly better than the previous one, but it's still trash. Its requirements for the attribute of power are too high. How could a fellow who can satisfy its requirements be interested in this kind of power of law? Don't tell me you only have this kind of trash in your hands. Being looked down upon by the other party, Grimm felt a little helpless. After all, the Sorcerer Association was the largest sorcerer organization in the sorcerer world. Naturally, their alchemy skills were much better than those of other regions. If he wanted to sell these spoils of war that he had obtained from another plane for a good price in the Wizard Association, where many masters gathered, he would really be humiliating himself. He couldn't blame others. Grimm sighed and waved his hand again. The contents of the mirror changed again. This time, there were 3 strange white mushrooms floating inside, and the energy aura they emitted was almost undetectable. Olivier glanced at the white mushrooms, puzzled as he waited for Grimm to explain. The energy aura from the 3 mushrooms was too weak and did not seem to be some kind of powerful magic seed. Moreover, as a rank 4 magus, it was impossible for him to take out some ordinary mushrooms to make up the numbers. Hence, Olivier could deduce that these mushrooms definitely had strange abilities that others did not know about. These are some strange mushrooms I obtained from another plane. They can't be used in battle and can only slowly improve the physique of us magi. Oh, how much of an improvement? Is it effective on rank 4 magi? It's effective on rank 4 magi, and the improvement is around 1 to 2 points. So high. Are there any side effects? From what I've seen so far, there aren't any obvious side effects. Olivier suddenly quieted down, his eyes flashing as if he was thinking about something or waiting for something. In a certain tower far away, a group of high-ranked magi who heard this news through a magic mirror could not help but become restless. At the rank of rank 4, it was extremely difficult to raise one's attributes by even the slightest bit. And now, Grimm had taken out a few unremarkable mushrooms and claimed that they could raise several main attributes by 1 or 2 points without any harm. This was simply too inconceivable. No one would complain that their vitality was too high, and no one would complain that their spiritual force was too abundant. If they could increase their main attributes by 1 or 2 points, most of the wizards present would be willing to exchange their most precious treasures for it. Of course, no one would take out a treasure like the source substance, but other treasures could be considered. Olivier used the divine luminous gem to exchange for the seeds of the strange mushrooms, as well as the method to grow and cultivate them. If there are any losses, the association will compensate you in the form of resources. The one who spoke was naturally the old vice president of the association, Domner. Compensate me? Olivier laughed coldly. Don't tell me the association has a second divine, luminous gem? I have great use for that luminous flame divine stone. Olivier, don't mess around. This exchange is very beneficial to the association. You must. Unfortunately, before the vice president could finish his sentence, Olivier's projection in the hall suddenly turned black. Clearly, he had cast a spell to cut off his connection with the wizard's pagoda. Be ****. Damn it. This Olivier is too arrogant. The hall was immediately filled with the complaints of many high-level magi. Even the face of the vice president, Domner, had turned somewhat gloomy. Henry, your wizard's pagoda is the closest to the AC mountain range. You should head there now. We can't let Olivier continue messing around like this. A bald, muscular man in the magic mirror sneered. It's not appropriate for me to go. That Olivier has never been obedient and only listens to the president. Now that the president is not here, This is the token of the association. Take it. If Olivier doesn't see the bigger picture and insists on messing around, I'll give you the authority to temporarily seal his status as an elder of the association. The vice president, Domner, raised his hand, and a strange token made of an unknown material passed through the magic mirror and floated in front of the bald, muscular man. The man grabbed the token and stuffed it into his robes, then sneered, I understand. Leave the matter there to me. After saying this, the light screen turned, and he appeared in the sky outside the room, flying as fast as lightning toward a certain place in the distance. Of course, Grimm had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. He and the witch Olivier were scheming and bargaining. Although these mushrooms from another world are magical, they still can't compare to the more powerful divine stones of light. If you don't have anything better, please leave. Grimm narrowed his eyes, blue light flashing in the depths of his pupils. He silently judged the truth in the words of the witch opposite him. Finally, he gritted his teeth and changed the contents of the magic mirror again, projecting a strange giant egg. This is a divine giant egg from another world. It still maintains a high level of activity. As long as you are willing to spend some effort to nurture it, it has the potential of level 5. The moment he saw the giant egg of the winged serpent god, Olivier's eyes finally widened. If he wanted to save his brother, ordinary monsters and resources were of no use. Only a level 5 divine object like this had a sliver of a chance. If he could let his brother form a life-sharing contract with the divine object in this giant egg, then he would have a chance of surpassing the limit of a level 1 Magus lifespan. Thus, Olivier did not hesitate to start casting spells to verify the attributes and effects of this giant egg. Grimm did not stop her, only silently watching from the side. After a long time, Olivier finally stopped casting spells. I want this giant egg, as well as the seeds and cultivation methods of those mushrooms from another world. If you agree, I'll give you the divine stones of light in exchange. Hearing the other party's conditions, Grimm laughed in disdain. Lord Olivier, although this is your territory, you don't have to ask for such an exorbitant price. That's a level 5 divine object of mine. It hasn't hatched yet, but you've also used spells to verify its vitality, so the success rate of successfully hatching it is very high. Hatching a divine object, as well as spending resources to accelerate its growth. I'm sure you know how many precious resources are needed. If it was so easy to hatch a divine object, would you be willing to trade it instead of keeping it for your own use? Which, Olivier, you don't have to purposely lower the price. I believe that if this divine object egg was given to those great level 5 magi, they would definitely be very happy to have another level 5 helper. The conditions they're offering won't be bad, right? Indeed, it won't be bad. It's a pity that they don't have the divine stones of light. You, faced with such an unreasonable witch, even Grimm was unable to restrain his anger. The other party actually wanted to use a level 4 item to trade for the level 5 item in his possession, as well as the seeds of the mutated mushrooms. This was simply wishful thinking. Grimm's face was filled with rage, and the air around him trembled with fire elemental energy, causing the temperature in the reception pavilion to rise sharply. Which, Olivier, is this the final condition you're offering? If that's the case, I choose to refuse. Although Grimm was eager to obtain the divine stones of light, he still felt that it was not worth it to pay such a price. Which Olivier's eyes flashed, and she coldly said, "Since our conditions are so different and neither side is willing to accept it, then why don't we have a wager? Then why don't we have a bet? Wager?" Chapter 1238. This was an enormous lake located in front of Blueberry Manor. Under the cover of night, through the calm surface of the lake, one could see the brightly lit manor in the distance. One could even hear the faint sounds of cheerful music. With Grimm's eyesight, he could even see the small flying platform that he had landed on. "Why did you bring me here?" Grimm looked around and couldn't help but ask. "This is just a temporary place for me to rest. There isn't a large arena here, so it's hard for us to fight at full strength." Olivier, still dressed in a long dress, leisurely pointed at the lake and said calmly, "Since that's the case, let's use this lake as the battlefield." Grimm listened calmly. The lake will be the battlefield. Whoever is forced out of the lake or into the water loses. In addition, the people in this manor are all my clansmen. I don't want them to be injured in our fight. Therefore, whoever is unable to control his power and causes it to spread beyond the lake also loses. What do you think? Can you accept this? Olivier stood there proudly. The cold night wind ruffled her long black hair and pressed her thin dress tightly against her body, accentuating her curves. What if the winner is decided? Grimm's expression didn't change. Not a hint of nervousness could be seen on his young and handsome face. If you win, you can name any condition you want. If you want the luminous godstone, I'll give it to you for free. But if you lose, you'll have to carry out the deal I just proposed. Olivier said coldly. Fair and reasonable. I accept. Grimm nodded in agreement without hesitation. Then let's enter, Olivier shouted and was the first to walk into the lake. Yes, she walked into the lake, not flew in. Just as she finished speaking, two strange black and white halos suddenly appeared around her body and began to vibrate up and down. From afar, the two halos looked as if they were pieced together by countless rays of light. In the process of vibrating and colliding, there were also specks of beautiful energy radiance sprinkling down. It looked so blurred, illusory, and so beautiful. Surrounded by that black and white aura, Olivier's body seemed to have become weightless. Using the tips of his white feet, he began to walk towards the center of the lake. Beep! Two strange magnetic fields detected. The magnetic poles are opposite, and the energy is strong. The magnetic pole attribute is changing dynamically. Dynamic changes? Hearing the Chip's prompt, Grim couldn't help but frown. Can you determine the basic characteristics of the two magnetic poles? Beep. The magnetic property of the black halo is attraction, while the magnetic property of the white halo is repulsion. When the two forces collide and couple, a special magnetic chaos will be produced. It is estimated to cause great damage to living beings. Additional note, this damage ignores defense and cannot be blocked by normal elemental defenses F***CK, 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 F***CK. Grim immediately felt a headache coming on. For the first time, he was in awe of this cruel witch. None of the Tier 4 players were easy to deal with, especially those who have been famous for a long time. Every one of them was extremely difficult to deal with. No wonder the other party dared to challenge him so boldly. However, he had already said his big words, and it was not Grim's style to be afraid of a fight. Hence, Grim stretched out his hand and grabbed his flaming coral staff. With a light tap, a ray of fire flew out from the staff and formed a pair of flaming wings on his back. With a slight flap of the enormous flaming wings, Grim shot towards the center of the lake like an arrow released from a bow. Behind him was a series of fiery marks that did not dissipate even after a long time. When he was on the road, Grim would either use magic mounts, flaming leap, or teleport. He rarely used the flaming wings. The only reason was that the flaming wings were too eye-catching and eye-catching. The flaming wings, which were formed purely from static flames, constantly flapped behind Grim's back, providing him with a strong ability to stay in the air and a high flying speed. However, these two huge balls of flame were floating in the dark night and could be clearly seen even from tens of miles away. Wherever the flames flew, they would leave behind fiery marks that would last for a long time. It was almost an eye-catching way to guide the pursuers. Using the flaming wings to run away was almost a joke. But today, facing the terrifying magnetic halo of the Witch of Slaughter, Grim had no choice but to use the flaming wings to increase his mobility. The huge flaming wings immediately attracted the attention of the people in Blueberry Manor. A gigantic barrier of light appeared out of thin air and enveloped the entire Blueberry Manor. Countless tiny black dots rose from the manor and looked at the two Tier 4 wizards from afar. However, none of them dared to disturb the two Tier 4 wizards. Are you ready? Olivier looked up at Grim, who was flying high above her, and said coldly, "Any time." As soon as his words came out, Olivier made a grabbing motion towards Grim, shouting coldly, "Get down here." Unknowingly, the white halo around her had disappeared and strangely appeared above Grim's head. In the next second, a terrifying gravitational force acted on Grim's body, causing him to sink in the air. Grim was shocked. His entire body was under the protection of the powerful flame energy at all times. Any kind of external power that wanted to affect him would have to break through this invisible and intangible flame energy field. But now, as soon as his opponent exerted force, that strange gravitational force had already pierced through the flame force field and landed on his body without any delay. His hair, his skin, his flesh and blood, his muscles and bones, as well as everything else in his body, were being pulled and suppressed by an invisible force, pressing him down fiercely. If Grim's vitality was lower than 20, his internal organs would have been injured. If Grim did not have the flame force, he would not have been able to withstand the gravity force. Grim shouted angrily. While flapping the flaming wings on his back, he waved his staff and created 5 fireballs that flew towards Olivier. The best defense was offense. Olivier's gravity control was too strange. He could not let him use his full strength. Facing the 5 fireballs, Olivier's eyebrows did not even twitch. She gently raised her right hand and pointed at the air. Two small, white halos appeared in front of the fireballs. Under the control of the strange gravity force, the first two fireballs instantly changed their trajectory and collided with each other, causing the other three fireballs to explode. 5 fireballs filled with violent flame energy exploded in the air, forming a huge fireball on the surface of the lake. The terrifying flaming shockwave, wrapped in scorching flames, instantly overturned the lake's surface for nearly a kilometer. Under the scorching heat, the water in the lake instantly began to boil. White smoke rose in spirals, forming a dreary mist in the sky above the battlefield. However, before the mist could disperse, it was vaporized by the terrifyingly high temperature, revealing the silhouettes of the two-tier force sorcerers standing opposite each other. Do you think a mere flame force can compete with my gravity control? Have a taste of my quadruple gravity halo. Olivier, who hadn't been injured in the previous explosion, let out a soft shout. His body began to vibrate with power, and 3 more white rings appeared around the white ring of light, which was suppressing Grimm's head, quickly fusing with the former. Grimm's tall, muscular body immediately let out a terrifying sound, as if his bones were being crushed. His eyes, ears, mouth, and nose instantly began to bleed, showing that his internal organs had been damaged. Grimm's body was quickly pushed down from the sky like a cannonball, heading straight for the surface of the lake. Seeing that this legendary fire wizard, whose reputation had been tarnished in the Tower Forest, was about to be injured by his gravity halo, Olivier immediately let out a wild laugh. His hands moved quickly, constantly controlling the gravity halo to prevent his opponent from breaking free. There was a dull thud. A huge fireball smashed through the surface of the lake and sank to the bottom. But seeing this, Olivier did not show any joy. Instead, his smile disappeared. The black and white halo around him spun, and he teleported 100 meters away. Just as he teleported away, a huge meteor fell from the sky, smashing into the lake. A thick pillar of water soared into the sky, rising to a height of 100 meters before turning into boiling water and sprinkling down. The terrifying impact first caused the water to sink, then turned into a huge wave that was several meters tall, roaring in all directions. Olivier drew a circle in front of him with his right hand, and a strange gravity halo instantly condensed, splitting the incoming wave into 2. As for Olivier, hiding behind the halo of light, not even a hint of moisture had touched his hair. After dealing with the huge wave, Olivier stared at Grimm, who had reappeared in the sky through the illusory gravity halo. His eyes finally revealed a hint of vigilance. Just now, the thing that had been pushed into the water was only a human-shaped flame, not Grimm's body. And this Grimm had mysteriously appeared in another place, taking advantage of Olivier's relaxed state of mind to unleash that terrifying fire spell, Heavenly Meteor Fall. If Olivier had not been so experienced and had sensed that something was wrong, he would have been smashed into the bottom of the lake, even if he had managed to catch the falling meteor. What kind of power was this? He was actually able to make a ball of fire imitate the aura of his soul, then hide in the dark and launch a sneak attack. Damn, this legendary fire wizard really did have some tricks up his sleeve. Olivier's eyes flashed, and he could not help but stare at the magic staff in Grimm's hand. For some reason, she felt that this magic staff was able to project a strange pressure on her soul, making her feel as though her mind was being controlled. Chapter 1239. The Blueberry Manor, which had been filled with songs and dances, was now completely silent. Along with the rise of the witchcraft light barrier, the human slaves' faces turned pale. They panicked and hid in the buildings. The Magi who were guests flew into the sky and watched the huge lake in front of the manor from afar. There, a huge ball of flame was floating in midair, fighting against 2 strange black and white light rings. Both parties moved quickly on the surface of the lake, the flames and the light rings clashing against each other. Every time they clashed, the air would tremble and half of the lake would be engulfed in a terrifying sea of flames. However, no matter how ferocious and violent the flames were, they could not suppress the existence of the black and white light rings. Wherever the light rings shone, the sea of flames would collapse, and the flames would collapse. No matter what kind of flames met the light rings, they would be shattered into pieces, causing the entire lake to be engulfed in terrifying flames. As Olivier's clansmen or subordinates, the magi present were naturally very familiar with the black and white light rings. However, many of them were unfamiliar with the formless golden flames. The several Tier 3 sorcerers hovering in the air could not help but shift their gazes to the strange sorcerer hiding under a thick black robe. Then, they shifted their gazes to a handsome young sorcerer. Tang was the person in this group who Lord Olivier trusted the most. Feeling the burning gazes of the crowd, the young Tang could not help but smile bitterly. All I know is that Lord Olivier invited the legendary fire Magus Grimm from the central continent. As for why they started fighting, I have no idea. From the looks of it, they were just sparring and not fighting. Grimm? I think I've heard of this name before. I think he's quite famous in the central continent. Yes, I've heard of him too. Haha. I also heard that this Magus Grimm only took 200 years to advance to grade 4. Those fellows from the central continent, in order to gain some face, even dare to make up such a ridiculous rumor. Yes, those good-for-nothings from the central continent are not worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as Lord Olivier. The magi present were all elite magi of the association. They had too many ways to investigate and understand the situation in the other regions. Unfortunately, the weak style of the scattered towers had left a deep impression on them, so they obviously did not believe the news they had heard. Listening to the crowd's sarcastic remarks, Bliss, who was by himself, lifted his head and scanned the crowd coldly through the shadows under his hood. There were a total of 7 magi from the Rank 3 Association. According to the indiscernible energy emanating from their bodies, there were only 1 or 2 that could raise Bliss's vigilance. As for the others, Bliss was confident that he could devour them one-on-one if he didn't restrict the way they fought. Therefore, Bliss had a deep disgust and hatred towards their arrogance and haughtiness. If this wasn't the enemy's territory, he really wanted to go all out and let these arrogant magi from the association know how vicious the central continent's magi were. The few magi of the association did not take Bliss' cold attitude to heart and continued to mingle and ridicule among themselves. It was not until a slightly older middle-aged magus stretched out his hand and performed a spell that he exclaimed in shock, 3,000 degrees. The aftermath of their power has already reached 3,000 degrees. What? Impossible. If it really was 3,000 degrees, we would have been flattened by the aftermath of the battle. Maybe they're able to restrain their strength. Didn't you see that the aftermath of their attacks didn't overflow into the lake? The few Rank 3 magi obviously did not believe that a magus from the central continent could fight evenly with their lord, and they all began to cast spells to check the energy level in the distance. The edge of the aftermath is 3,116 degrees. The core area is 4,500 degrees. The moment their strength collided, I detected that the energy level was 5,700 degrees. As the numbers were reported, the few people present could not help but break out in cold sweat. For the first time, they felt that the barrier of light in front of them was a little too weak. From the looks of it, both sides were restraining their strength, not allowing the aftermath of the battle to spread beyond the lake surface. But in such a tense and intense battle, who could maintain their composure from beginning to end? If any of the magi were to get carried away or lose control of their strength, it would only take a matter of minutes for them to destroy the entire Blueberry Manor. Coincidentally, the few Rank 3 magi began to hurriedly cast defensive spells on themselves. Wizard Tang, who was in charge of the Blueberry Manor, slowly turned the snake-eye magic ring on his pinky finger and began to order the Rank 2 magi who were still watching the battle to immediately evacuate the magi. Seeing how nervous the Rank 3 magi were, The rest of the Magi immediately realized how dangerous the situation was. They all retreated into the buildings and activated all the defensive spell formations. Only then did they feel a little more at ease. The battle on the surface of the lake was as dangerous as ever. Both sides were fighting with all their might, and some of them were even forced to use some of their hidden techniques. Grimm had transformed into a ball of invisible flames, and he was constantly circling around Olivier's body, using scorching fireballs and pillars of fire to attack her body. Meanwhile, 1,000 meters away, a powerful centaur formed from black mist was furiously attacking the shadow demon that flickered in and out of existence. As for that Olivier, his body was surrounded by multiple rings of black and white light. These halos could be big or small, thick or thin, and even the gravitational force could be deflected in an instant. Under her meticulous control, the halos could either attract or repel each other, and in the blink of an eye, they could even change their properties more than 10 times. As long as one was trapped by her gravity halos, even a body as tough as steel would be squeezed, stretched, or twisted into all sorts of strange shapes. Not to mention, Grimm's previous body was made of flesh and blood. Thus, after experiencing the terrifying effects of the chaotic gravity, Grimm transformed his body into a flaming body, and then used the golden flames from the heart of the laws to protect his body. As expected, with the protection of the law of fire, Olivier's gravity halos could no longer directly affect his body. The battle between the two quickly turned into a battle of laws. Olivier's law of gravity was clearly superior to Grimm's law of fire, but Grimm's understanding of the laws was clearly superior to Olivier's. Increased fire, empower fire, fire penetration, fire invisibility, fire critical, fire vulnerability, fire endurance. The 7 laws of fire were used alternately, and every attack gave Olivier a completely new experience. After Olivier had gotten used to the frequency and effects of his attacks, Grimm quickly combined several laws of fire, giving his fire spells a strange power. To tell the truth, for the first time in his life, Olivier felt that fire was such a detestable type of magical element. With fire penetration, Olivier's high elemental resistance became useless. With fire critical, even the slightest bit of fire could cause him terrifying damage. With fire invisibility, even Olivier had to constantly pay attention to every single elemental change in his surroundings. With fire vulnerability, Olivier's plan of trading blows with Grimm became a joke. With fire endurance, any flames that touched his body became very difficult to deal with, and it was very difficult to quickly get rid of them. After realizing the power of Grimm's laws of fire, Olivier put away the arrogance in his heart and began to take his opponent seriously. He quickly took out his first trump card, a centaur's soul essence that existed between a solid and incorporeal body. This centaur's soul essence was able to freely switch between a solid and incorporeal body, using its incorporeal body to dodge the physical attacks of the enemy, and then quickly return to its solid form, using the terrifying War Trample. Stun the enemy, then use the opportunity to launch a ferocious close-range attack. If Grimm was not prepared, Olivier, who had an endless variety of combat techniques, and a centaur's soul essence could really knock him out of the sky. Fortunately, the enemy had help, and so did Grimm. The shadow demon that came out from behind instantly resisted the centaur soul essence's crazy attack. Both sides dashed left and right on the surface of the lake, dodging and escaping nonstop. They were evenly matched, and it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. Seeing that his opponent had summoned a creature, Grimm no longer held back. He raised his hand and tossed out a class 4 magical mantis core, quickly summoning a 12 to 13 meter tall class 4 molten giant. Although this molten giant only had the power of class 4 magma, it was still able to attack Olivier with half of its upper body, head, and arms exposed when it fell into the lake. The raging flames on its body intertwined with the lake water, causing the entire lake's surface to gurgle and boil. The originally large number of aquatic creatures in the lake were completely annihilated. One by one, they were cooked and floated to the surface of the water. Then, they were turned into small fireballs by Grimm's terrifying inferno domain and began to burn crazily. Olivier, who was relying on the gravity ring to freely move about the lake and the sky, cried out in pain under the barrage of fire spells. Although the gravity ring around her had blocked all the attacks, the intense pain caused by the shattered flames still caused her to furrow her brows. The enraged Olivier stretched out his arms, and countless gravity rings the size of wash basins whizzed forward, instantly turning the molten giant into a sieve. The magma shield and inferno shield were unable to block the gravity ring. Wherever the gravity ring passed through, the fire elemental particles were shattered by the chaotic gravity, leaving large holes on the body of the molten giant. Chapter 1240. At Grimm's and Olivier's level, ordinary statistics could no longer describe the power and terror of their battles. Even if they were all grade 4 magi, whether or not they had mastered a certain planar law, as well as the depth of their mastery of the planar law, would become a huge bargaining chip between magi. The reason why Olivier was able to control the gravity ring so skillfully was undoubtedly because of her special ability. Although Grimm's mastery of the law of fire was not as profound as Olivier's mastery of gravity, his ability to analyze and use the law was clearly superior. Seriously speaking, both of them had already grasped the basic power of the law, which made them the cream of the crop among the grade 4 magi. Thus, the collision of the laws caused by the battle between these two magi of half-laws was becoming more and more obvious. The entire surface of the huge lake had been completely overturned by the strange black and white gravity ring. The collision of the two forces could be seen in almost every corner of the lake, and the vibrations caused by them had also changed the nature of the laws in this space. On the battlefield, any ball of flame, any halo would become so dangerous, so tyrannical. Many times, the strange changes caused by the vibrations of the laws would cause the flames to no longer look like flames, and the halos to no longer look like halos. Even if the two initiators were here, they would not dare to touch these things that they had cast with their own hands, which had now changed beyond recognition. Olivier's gravity halo was ever-changing. She could either absorb or repel these two simple spells, but she managed to turn them into a dazzling display of skill. Olivier could use the repulsive property of the gravity ring to deflect Grimm's long-range attacks to the side, or directly disrupt the internal model of the spell, causing it to collapse halfway. As for Grimm's close-range attacks, Olivier used the attraction and repulsive property of the gravity ring to the extreme. When Grimm had the opportunity to attack, she would use the repulsive property to push him far away. When Olivier was ready to attack, she would use the attraction property to pull Grimm in front of her. This method of using the gravity ring to control the battlefield was simply enough to drive her enemies crazy. If her enemy wasn't Grimm, she might have been pressed to the ground and rubbed against him like crazy. However, Grimm's combat skills and methods were not to be trifled with. The combination of various fire laws and the precise casting of powerful fire spells made Grimm a terrifying firepower that no one dared to provoke. Although the majority of his attacks were deflected or destroyed by the enemy, the powerful shockwave from his attacks still caused Olivier a terrifying amount of damage. Taking advantage of the opportunity provided by the flaming leap, Grimm once again broke free from the gravitational halo's control and arrived at Olivier's side. Immediately, without hesitation, he released his dragon's breath, and a cone-shaped flame that covered a 120-degree area swept towards Olivier in an earth-shattering manner. One or two gravity halos wouldn't be able to withstand such a large-scale fire spell. Olivier's two hands moved in a circular motion. With one hand, he drew out a white ring of light to push himself backwards, while with the other, he formed a black and white ring of gravity, which shot towards the depths of the flames like a cannonball. The raging flames crazily chased after Olivier's retreating body, and the tip of the flames was about to lick the hem of her dress. The extreme heat and terrifying flames caused Olivier's dress, which was not protected by any spells, to burst into flames. She immediately let out a muffled groan on the battlefield. At the same time, Olivier's gravity cannonball was like a boulder smashing into the water, breaking through the flames and directly striking Grimm's body. Grimm didn't manage to dodge in time, and his entire left arm was instantly crushed by the gravity cannon shot, turning into a rain of fire that filled the sky. With a muffled groan, Grimm dodged to the side, and the flame energy in his body surged out from his broken arm, quickly growing a new flaming arm. But in terms of color, this new arm was brighter and weaker than the rest of his body. Ever since the start of the battle, Grimm had directly transformed his body into a body of flames. This way, his body would no longer have any flaws, and even if some parts were damaged, he could use the flame energy to quickly repair them. This was one of the main reasons why elemental sorcerers like to transform their bodies into elemental particles. There was a loud thud. Olivier's entire body was covered in alternating black and white gravity rings as she rushed out of the flames. Her dress had been burned into holes, revealing the same charred skin underneath. "Bastard! How dare you damage my body?" Olivier angrily roared. "You forced me to do this." The golden halo above her head flickered and flowed down like a layer of light, quickly covering her with a purple leather armor. At the same time, a strange magic wand that was only half a meter long suddenly appeared in her hand. After fully equipping her magic wand, Olivier's aura immediately skyrocketed. Every time the magic wand in her hand struck at Grimm, it would emit a ring of gravity rings that flew towards Grimm's body. Seeing this, Grimm didn't dare to hesitate and waved the magic wand in his hand. Chain of fireballs, crimson flame storm, holy light retribution. A series of fire spells mixed with the skills of his equipment flew towards Grimm. Two strange forces collided on the surface of the lake, immediately creating a terrifying elemental storm. The law of fire and the law of gravity were both important components of the plane. Their collisions and interactions also caused the fundamental laws of this space to become chaotic and dangerous. Visible to the naked eye, all sorts of strange lights were emitted from the point of collision, drifting in all directions. As the people involved, both Grimm and Olivier felt a heartfelt fear towards these illusionary lights. They hurriedly dodged to another place to avoid being entangled by these illusionary lights. These lights were actually the energy fragments that leaked out after the fundamental laws of this plane were damaged. Because they had already mutated, there was no way they could be absorbed back into the plane. Moreover, this kind of mutated energy was like a poison to the two's energy system, which had been purified day by day. If they allowed themselves to be entangled by this mutated energy, they would probably have to spend an enormous amount of effort and resources to purify it. Even more terrifyingly, this would waste their precious time in comprehending the laws. In the beginning, the two didn't fight very intensely. The level of their energy was limited to the elemental plane and didn't involve too much law force. But as the two fought with all their might, the amount of energy they could use became greater and greater, and so did the level of their power. The entire battlefield had become a blatant collision of laws. As a result, the collision of laws caused many terrifying scars on the lake that were hard to repair. Blurred and illusory law fragments, distorted and drifting spatial cracks, almost covered the entire space above and below the water. This forced the two combatants to increase their vigilance. While fighting fiercely, they carefully avoided these floating minefields. At this point, the value of the AI chip in Grimm's mind became apparent. Grimm could fight with all his might, while the AI chip was in charge of sensing the situation of the battlefield and predicting the direction of the battle. All the minefields and traps were marked with different colors by the AI chip. The main targets of the opponent's attacks were marked with different colors. As long as Grimm avoided the red dots and the blood region, he would be able to stay in the safe green region and neutralize 80% of his opponent's attacks. Of course, on the battlefield, the so-called safe and dangerous areas were dynamic and relative. Olivier was not a newbie on the battlefield. He was a terrifying expert who had tortured and killed witches. Her powerful control over gravity allowed her to change the gravity in a specific area at will. Within the range of her power, there was no such thing as a safe place. Moreover, the safe zone marked by the AI chip had actually reached a terrifying level of energy. However, this energy damage was temporarily unable to affect Grimm's ability to continue fighting. This is your power. It's not bad. Olivier raised a large gravity ring in front of him, blocking Grimm's storm-like attacks. He said coldly, "However, if this is all you have, it's not enough to take advantage of me." However, before she could finish her sentence, the fire spells that were flying in front of the gravity ring suddenly exploded. In the past, the fire spells were all targeted at Olivier. Hence, they were easily intercepted by Olivier's gravity halo, and their power was not fully unleashed. But this time, Grimm's fire spell was aimed at her gravity ring of light, and the full power of the flame storm immediately caused terrifying consequences. Olivier's expression suddenly changed. He hurriedly retreated, but the exploding firestorm quickly filled up every inch of space in the area. Although the gravity ring was very useful, there were still gaps. The powerful fire energy seeped through the gaps of the gravity ring and crazily attacked the retreating Olivier. The exquisite purple leather armor on her body immediately emitted a faint purple glow, condensing into a layer of strange elemental armor. The elemental armor and the fire energy collided. Although the fire energy was repelled and did not cause any new burns to Olivier, under the attack of the two huge forces, she still suffered terrible damage. After all, she was only an elemental magus, and the physique of a female magus was generally weaker than that of a male magus. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.